Skip the Flip 2, 3 Keys to Any Deal by Hayden Crabtree. For weekly real estate investing content, visit my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search Hayden Crabtree, where I'm constantly adding new videos for free that are intended to help you become a better real estate investor. Preface. The purpose of this book is very simple. You either want to be a real estate investor and have done 0 deals, or you want to have a portfolio that you're trying to grow. It's my job to teach you how to do that step by step. This book is made to be holistic, meaning I want to teach you the things you haven't even thought about. You don't know what you don't know right now, and I'm going to open your eyes. Most people's real estate education goes like this. Step 1, get an itch to become a real estate investor. Step 2, Google how to invest in real estate. Step 3, read a bunch of blogs, listen to some podcasts, or watch a lot of YouTube videos. Step 4, realize how much information is out there and become excited, but also overwhelmed with all of it. Step 5, take a step back to think about which path is right for you. And then step 6, unfortunately, never take action on any strategy at all. This is the sad truth. The amount of people who are interested in real estate investing versus the number of people who actually execute is a sad statistic. Everyone knows that real estate makes millionaires. Some people make millions in a short number of years by putting in a crazy amount of work. Others become wealthy quietly over the long term, watching their wealth build every day without much effort. For those that get started, it's inevitable as long as they don't give up. But few people crack the code on how to get started the right way. The reason for that is because real estate is a huge world filled with new struggles and new challenges all the time. Every day there's a new problem that you have to figure out how to solve. This is especially true when you're first starting out and learning the ropes. When you're experienced, these challenges are a breeze. When you're new, they can break you. $7,000 plumbing repair on a building that you weren't expecting, that would put most new investors in a bad mood for an entire month. Not to mention, they might not even have the cash to cover the expense. Seasoned investors call this a normal Tuesday. They call their people to have it taken care of and still make it to their lunch appointment on time. Why? Preparation, excellence. They've got their degree from the School of Hard Knocks, and that's the purpose of this book. To teach you what challenges you had ahead of you, show you how to prepare for them, and make sure you have the best advice possible so that you can grow your portfolio however fast and big you want to grow it. If you knew how to find deals that were profitable investments, even in hot markets, if you knew how to analyze those deals so that you could compare them to other opportunities, if you knew how to set up those investments for success from day one, if you knew what to do on an ongoing basis to have continued success with those investments, if you knew how to structure win-win deals that allowed you to acquire properties no matter how much money you do or don't have, the question is, do you think you could be a real estate investor? Do you think you could get to financial freedom? And the answer is, hell yes, you could. In the pages ahead, you're going to learn what the 3 things you have to have in order to build a successful real estate investing portfolio. No matter where you're starting from, whether you're currently hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, or you got $1 million in the bank, or anywhere in between, it doesn't matter. This framework applies to everyone from solo investors to big firms. So buckle up, grab a notepad, and let's dive into a concept that's going to change your life. I call the concept the 3 keys to any deal, and we're going to use this simple image to talk about it. Now listen, if you're listening to this audiobook instead of reading through the pages, I've put together a PDF package for you to where you can go and look at the images that we're talking about. Just go to haydencrabtree.com/resources and click on the second book, and you can get the PDF there to review. Throughout this book, you're going to learn what each of these D, M, and C keys are. This is a framework. It works in any market conditions, whether we're at all-time high pricing or we're in a crash. It's true today, it was true 100 years ago, and it will be true 100 years from now. Once you learn it, you'll have a new outlook on all real estate deals. You'll begin to see your future as an investor differently. You'll start to say to yourself, I've got 2 of the 3 keys figured out here. Here's what I can go do to solve for the 3rd key and make progress on this deal. You'll know what your strengths are, what your biggest challenges are, and begin to take action on solving problems and acquiring properties in a way that utilizes your strengths. In my first book, Skip the Flip, Secrets the 1% Know About Real Estate Investing, I taught you how the game of real estate works and why buying real estate for cash flow over the long term is your best path to wealth. If you haven't read it yet, I'd recommend you listen to it or read it before listening or reading this book. That book is the foundational knowledge that you need that we're going to build upon in these pages. And so if you haven't read or listened to that book, you can go to haydencrabtree.com/free book and get that best-selling book absolutely free in PDF or audiobook. In this book, you're going to learn the game plan of what you need to get started building a cash flow portfolio on your own, no matter what position you're currently in. My first piece of advice. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give to people is be careful who you get your advice from. What I mean by that is that if the person you're taking advice from has never succeeded in the area you're trying to grow in, don't listen to them. So why should you listen to me if you're seeking to do your first deal or grow your portfolio? When I was in college, I realized I didn't want to sit behind a desk. I didn't want to have to ask my boss if I could go on a vacation. I didn't want to have to ask for a raise each year if I wanted more money. I didn't want to hope the stock market would go up and I would have enough cash to retire in 40 years. I wanted control. I wanted freedom. I wanted abundance. I wanted to call the shots. If I succeeded, I wanted to be responsible. If I failed, I wanted to be responsible. I'd be willing to bet you want the same thing. I set a goal that's the exact opposite of what most people's goal is in college. My goal was this. When I graduated, I didn't want to get a job. I wanted real estate to be the primary source of income, and I wanted to be the sole owner of my time. I decided to do something to make this goal a reality. As a college kid, I didn't have much money. I had to really assess how I was going to achieve my goal. Now, I'm a big fan of Robert Kiyosaki, and I had read a quote of his that said, "When you are young, work to learn, not to earn." I took this to heart early in my career. After reading his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I made the commitment to becoming a real estate investor. With a burning desire to make quick progress, I got on the internet, Googled real estate investing Athens, Georgia, which is where I was living and where I went to college, and clicked on the first forum that popped up. In this forum, I read a guy tell a story about how he had wholesaled 8 duplexes and made a couple $100,000. Then sometime later, he went on to buy them back from the guy who originally bought them from him. After buying them back, he put some money back into the property, raised the rents, and did a cash out refi. He went on to own the 16 units with no cash out of pocket. At the end of the day, he made hundreds of thousands of dollars, owned the property with no cash out of pocket, had a cash flowing piece of real estate that put money in his pocket each month, hundreds of thousands in equity, and a pile of tax benefits. I thought to myself, what language is this guy speaking? What is he even talking about? And most importantly, how do I do this myself? So I did what any committed person would do. I stalked the guy on the internet, found his phone number, and gave him a call. When he picked up the phone, I awkwardly said, "Hey sir, my name is Hayden. I see on the internet you make a lot of money from real estate. I'm interested in doing the same thing. I'd love it if we could grab some coffee sometime or if I could buy you lunch." I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "I don't drink coffee, but you can meet me at one of my properties in about 15 minutes. I'm on my way over there right now." Not expecting that as an answer, with no words coming out of my mouth, all I said was, "Text me the address and I'll see you in 15 minutes. Filled with excitement and nervousness at the same time, I ran down to my car, plugged in the address, and took off. At the property, I introduced myself, learned about what he had going on at this project, and I just broke it down plain and simple for him. I didn't have much to say. I had no money. I had no experience. I had no connections, but I had a burning desire to control my life. I told him, "I love the idea of being a real estate investor, but I have no idea where to start. I have no money and no experience, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this a reality." Then I said something that even surprised me when it came out of my mouth. "I'll work for you for free," I told the random stranger I had stalked on the internet. It was kind of like a scene from a movie. He looked at me to see if I was serious. I looked back with conviction. All he said was, "I'll see you tomorrow. Meet me at this address." The next day, I showed up. And the day after that. And again, and again, and again. I would miss parties to go to work without being paid. I would skip class to go to work without being paid. I ditched hanging out with friends to go to work without being paid. That ended up in me losing a lot of friends and experiences that most people have in college. All in all, I worked for free for just about a year for this stranger off the internet who became my first real estate mentor. This is where I cut my teeth. Not in a classroom, not from books, from real life. I got thrown in the fire from day one, getting investing experience that takes most people decades to get. I was willing to do whatever it took to learn how the world of real estate investing really worked. Need a property painted? I'll do it for free. Need me to drive 2 hours and look at a deal? I'll do it for free. Some system in your business not working well? I'll redesign your whole system and implement a new one for free. Need to find some deals? I'll drive around looking for opportunities for 8+ hours a day for free. Need to light a fire under a contractor's butt so we can get a project finished? I'll manage the contractor for free. Need to communicate with a potential property seller who we are and what we do? I'll write thousands of letters by hand and send them for free. This was such a powerful experience for me for several reasons. First, my mentor had been investing in real estate for just over 10 years at the point I started working for him. He had started out as most people do, working a regular job and starting real estate as a side hustle. Because he didn't have a big bank account in the beginning, he started by wholesaling properties to make cash. When he would get enough cash saved up, he would keep one of the properties instead of wholesaling it and do a full flip on the property for even bigger profits. Once the profits really piled up in the bank, he would deploy those funds into rental houses, still seeking to increase the value and make a great return. After the properties had been owned for a year or more, he would take those rental houses, sell them, and take the profits into a 1031 exchange. This is a tax loophole where you can move all of your profits from one property to another without having to pay taxes on the profits. Doing this, he could get all of those profits into a larger multifamily property and ride the cash flow wave for life. His plan was, and still is, to hold the properties until either 1, he gets a ridiculously high offer on the property. In this case, he takes the profits into another 1031 exchange and does the same thing but with an even bigger property. Or his second option is he dies and his kids get the property at a stepped up tax basis. The reason this was so powerful for me is that I got to see inside of a business that had been running for years. I learned how to wholesale for quick cash, flip for bigger profits, buy single-family rentals to put money to work for the long term, and acquire multifamily properties for big cash flow and huge tax benefits. I'm blessed because at the time he was doing it all. That's something most people don't get to experience. There were so many moving parts. I was thrown in the fire from day one and had to learn quickly. The main thing I learned during this time period is that the shiny object of real estate, which is wholesaling and flipping, was just a job, a job. That means just over broke, still trading your time for money. You're probably thinking, but those people who are wholesaling and flipping properties are real estate investors too. How can you say they have a job? Are flippers and wholesalers in real estate? Yes. But the problem is they're still trading their time, energy, and effort for one-time money. It's like saying construction workers are in real estate. When you do wholesale deals, you get a one-time fee. When you flip properties, you get a one-time profit. When you have a job, you get paid one time for each hour of work you put in. There's no difference between a job and flipping or wholesaling. Can you make more money in wholesaling than you can in a job? Can you make more money in flipping than you can in a job? Maybe, but it's not guaranteed. In fact, a lot of new flippers lose money, especially when the market's not hot. Jobs actually come with less risk. They guarantee you make money when you show up. If you build your skill set, you can get paid a lot of money in certain jobs. But at its core, jobs, flipping, and wholesaling are flawed because you're trading money for the most valuable resource in the world, your time. That's not what the wealthy do. The wealthy own assets. Assets they can use other people's money, debt, to buy. Assets that will go up in value. Assets that produce income and pay their debt off for them. Assets that will reduce their tax bill and allow them to keep more of the money they earn. Assets that cash flow, paying the owner each month. Assets that don't require constant oversight and management. When working for free, I learned that I wanted to be wealthy. I did not want a job. So I decided I was going to get really good at being a cash flow investor, and I wasn't going to worry about wholesaling, flipping, or hacking, or any other job. I was going to figure out a way to start owning assets that would make me wealthy, even if I was a broke college kid with no money, no connections, and no experience. So I gave it my all and did whatever it took to provide value for my mentor. Fast forward a year of free labor, I had learned so many new skills. I can now provide so much value, my then mentor decided to make me a partner, mainly because I was willing to go above and beyond. I went from working for free to working for ownership and deals. Fast forward a few years from that point, I built a commercial real estate portfolio with the following stats: 500,000 square feet, $9 million of property, $2.5 million of cash into these deals, and we were in 5 states. I'm extremely proud of the hard work that was put in, but even beyond my time working for free, my partner and I learned something new every day about scaling a commercial real estate portfolio. One day we looked up and realized all that we had learned, and it was a lot. One day we asked ourselves, what if we decide to take everything we've learned and do a reset? Let's sell it and do it again. And so that's what we did. We put a majority of our properties up for sale, keeping a few of our favorite projects, and decided to start over. In the sale, we hit an average of 86% IRR for ourselves and our investors. Insane numbers, unheard of numbers. If you're not aware, the average stock market return is 7 or 8%. Average real estate is somewhere 10 to 12%. We did 86% on average. We turned $2.5 million into $6.1 million in 3 years. And I'm not saying this to brag. I'm not saying this to gloat. I'm not saying this to impress you. I'm saying this to you for 2 reasons. Number 1, get your advice from somebody who has done what you want to do. Number 2, when you have the right framework and you're willing to do the work, you can create life-changing money for yourselves and others in a short period of time. Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to grow? Are you willing to do things you don't want to do every day? Real estate is a great game. It's simple, but not easy. I can't put the work in for you, but I can help you understand what work needs to be done. So let's do this. An overview of the 3 keys. Here on the screen, there's an image of a triangle. In the bottom left is a D. In the bottom right is an M. At the top is a C. The rest of this book is built around this model. I call it the DMC model. The D and the M on the bottom are the foundation. The C piece at the top brings it all together and makes it possible. It's really easy to understand. It's actually so simple that it can be compared to a car ride. There are 3 things you need in order to make a car ride possible. Now we have the same image, but in the bottom left, instead of a D, we have the vehicle. The first thing you need in a car ride is a vehicle. There are many kinds of vehicles. There are cars, SUVs, and trucks. There are fast vehicles and slow vehicles, heavy vehicles and light vehicles, old and new. They comes in all different colors and shapes. It really doesn't matter what kind of vehicle it is, as long as it runs smoothly and is reliable. It'll get the job done from getting you from point A to point B. The next piece of the puzzle is the driver. This is taking the place of the M key in the image. You need someone to sit behind that wheel and steer the car to its destination. The person who knows the rules of the road. They have to know how to operate the vehicle. There are different levels of drivers, from a 16-year-old who can't seem to pass the test and get their license, all the way up to a world-class race car driver. But as long as you have someone with a license, you're good. This is the foundation, a reliable vehicle and a qualified driver. A strong real estate portfolio is built around a strong foundation. If the car is no good, it won't start and you have no hope of making it anywhere. If you don't have someone who's qualified to drive, a good car is no value. It can be the best car in the world, but if you can't drive it, it's no good to you and it can't take you anywhere. The third and the final piece at the top of the triangle of a car ride is the energy. You need gas, diesel, or electricity to power the vehicle. There are different types of energy and they need to match up with the vehicle that they are in. You can't put diesel fuel in a regular car. Electricity won't work on a gas engine. The fuel has to match the vehicle or it's no good. Without any fuel, no matter how great of a vehicle and how great of a driver you are, there will be no movement. All 3 pieces of the deal work together. A reliable vehicle plus a qualified driver plus the correct fuel equals a car ride. The same is true for real estate deals, no matter how big, small, old, or new. No matter what strategy you're using, doesn't matter if you have no money or all the money in the world. The model is true in all scenarios. Let's take a look at what the 3 keys to any deal are. The first key to growing your portfolio is to have a deal that's investable and worthy of your energy and attention. We'll get into all the different kinds of deals, strategies, where to find deals, how to analyze deals, and other important factors in section 1 of this book. The most important thing for you to realize is that just because you may have a great deal on your hands does not mean that you're ready to become a real estate investor. Being able to find great deals is one of the world's most valuable skills. When I look back on how I've built wealth, I can relate everything back to finding amazing deals. Finding deals is knowing where to look and a whole lot of hustle. Anyone can do this, but few actually do it. The next step after finding a deal is having a skill set to analyze the financials and be able to know with confidence that what you're looking at is going to make money or not. Not only make money, but make enough money to hit your target returns based on your goals. And we're going to get more into this later. Once you have a deal or a vehicle, it's important to understand how it works. You can't go buy a huge old truck and expect it to drive 200 miles an hour. All vehicles are built differently and have different capabilities. This is true with deals as well, and it's your job to understand what your deal is and what your deal isn't. The next key in the equation is management. This is the M key. Managing your investments is just like driving a car. It's not difficult, but you have to learn how to do it. If you're reading this book, you have the ability to drive a car. In fact, since this is the audiobook, you're probably in your car driving right now. At one point in your life, you did not have the skills, but you had the ability. Then you began practicing driving. You weren't great at first, but that's okay because you learned and got better. You built your skills and eventually got your driver's license. Now when you get in a car, you have the confidence that you can drive wherever you need to safely. This is very similar to investment management. You may not have the skills you need in order to manage your investments, but you already have the ability. The goal is for you to come out on the other side of this book and having built some skills, as well as know what you need to do in order to continue developing your investment management skills. What most people don't realize is that there's actually two different kinds of management, so pay attention to section 2 carefully. I believe one is critically important that all investors do themselves, and I think the other is just a job. We don't invest in real estate because we want a job. We do it for freedom. So we're going to dive into this more in section 2. The third and the final key that sits at the top of the triangle, the C key, is the capital. This is the energy that's required to get the journey going. Just like in a car ride where you need to make sure the fuel matches the vehicle, in real estate, you need to make sure the capital matches the deal. There are many kinds of capital out there, and we're going to dive into this in section 3. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned in my time as an investor is you don't always have to personally have the energy for the vehicle. If you have a vehicle and you know how to drive it, you can get gas money from other people by allowing them to ride with you. What this means in our real estate discussion is that if you can solve other people's problems, you can leverage the capital or energy that they have in order to create a true win-win scenario. This isn't hypothetical, this is real life. Most new investors have a scarcity mindset. They think they're never going to create a cash flowing portfolio until they've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money to invest. And this really just isn't the case. To open your eyes, check this out. On January 1st, 2020, the Federal Reserve had $4.7 trillion of assets. Simply put, this is how many dollars the government's created. On January 1st, 2021, which is just 12 months later, the Federal Reserve had $7.3 trillion of assets. If you want to see where this number is at today, go to Google, type in Federal Reserve balance sheet, and click on the first link. Let's put this into perspective. Most people think that $1 million is a lot of money. Once we get into the billions, people's eyes start to glaze over because it's just a big number. $1 trillion is incomprehensible to the brain. So let's put it in a different way that's hopefully going to help you understand what I'm saying. 1 million seconds, so if we, instead of looking at dollars, let's look at seconds and convert it into time. 1 million seconds is 11.5 days. 11 and a half days is 1 million seconds. 1 billion seconds is 31.7 years. So 1 million seconds was 11 and a half days. 1 billion seconds is 31.7 years. Now, 1 trillion seconds is 31,709 years. It's a crazy difference between a million and a trillion. So the point that I'm getting at here is that a trillion is a huge number. And there were $2.6 trillion created in a single 12-month time span between January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2021. And that's just in the United States. Similar numbers were put up all around the world in other countries. The point I'm making here, there is no shortage of capital in the world. More than ever, the most valuable key to having success is a good deal and someone who knows how to manage it. A great vehicle and a reliable driver. That's the foundation. This is really good news for someone who doesn't have much money, but they're willing to put the work into finding great deals and managing those investments properly. This really is not good news for someone who has cash and thinks that's the only thing they need in order to build a great real estate portfolio. It's not. So grab some caffeine and let's dive into what you need to know about each of these 3 keys to growing your portfolio in the coming sections 1, 2, and 3. Section 1, the deal. Section 1 covers everything you need to know about the deal. We're going to talk about strategies to find deals, where to look for deals, what city they should be located in, how to analyze deals, different investment strategies, deal types, and how to close a deal. Section 1.1, swimming with the sharks. Man, this really sucks. Why are we doing this again? I asked my mentors. I was checking my tongue to see if I had a paper cut on it. I couldn't tell because my tongue was nearly numb from licking hundreds of envelopes. This is the best way to find deals that are going to meet our cash flow goals, he told me. It wasn't making any sense to me. How did sending thousands of letters out mean we're going to get deals? Can we just go look on the internet and see what properties are for sale and buy some of those? I asked with high hopes so I could give my tongue a break for the rest of the day. We could, but really that's a waste of time. We don't fool around with on-market deals. Here we go again, I thought to myself. More real estate insider language that I have to learn. It was just a week or two into my time working for free as I learned what would be one of the most valuable lessons of my investing career, the difference between on-market and off-market deals. This is huge, insanely powerful for those who understand it and actually apply the lessons. Have you ever heard of the blue ocean strategy? If not, go check out the book published by Harvard Business Review. Here's a brief overview. In the world of business, we have two different kinds of waters. There are blue oceans and red oceans. Red oceans are crowded with sharks. They get their color from all the blood in the water from the shark feeding frenzy. Cutthroat, competitive, constant struggle. It's very difficult to be successful in a red ocean because you're battling so much competition. Normally the competition is better than you. They have more experience, more money, a better reputation, and most importantly, better relationships. In the world of real estate, when a property is for sale to the public, meaning there's a sign on the front that says for sale, this is known as a listed property. Listed properties are also called on market. When a property is listed, it means that the owner has hired a broker or agent to represent them in selling the property for them. The broker or agent then turns around and puts that property in a database called the Multiple Listing Service. This is called the MLS for short. You have to be a licensed agent and pay membership fees in order to get access to the MLS. But thanks to the rise of the internet, we have things like Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, Realtor.com, LoopNet, Crexi. And on these sites, you don't have to have a real estate license or pay any sort of money in order to see properties for sale. Anyone with internet access can go online and see what properties are listed. Let me ask you a question. If you're a real estate investor with a couple of deals or no deals, and you go look at listed properties on any of the online sites, what kind of oceans are you swimming in? The red oceans with all the sharks. This is not where you belong. You're a guppy, not a shark. You will get eaten. Get out now. But this doesn't mean that you have no hopes of growing into a shark. You just have to be smart and look for ways to grow without so much fierce competition. This is why you want to be swimming in the blue oceans. You want little competition and more opportunities. This is why you 100%, absolutely, without a doubt, have to be looking for off-market properties. Does that make sense? So what is an off-market property? An off-market property is every property in the world that's not listed. So you're probably thinking to yourself right now, wait a second, you're telling me that I'm going to ignore the properties that are listed for sale, and instead you want me to go buy properties that are not for sale. That doesn't make any sense, Hayden. It sounds confusing, but it's absolutely true. Why is it true? Because this is the exact spot that most other buyers are not looking for deals. And where does that take us when we have little competition? It takes us into the blue oceans, right where we want to be as we grow from real estate guppies into sharks. So does this mean that every single property in the world that's not listed for sale is going to be a great deal? Absolutely not. Finding off-market properties is like finding a needle in a haystack. I'll say it again. You have to know where to look and have a whole lot of hustle. But I can let you in on a little secret that will make the size of the haystack you're sifting through smaller and smaller and increase your chances of finding a great deal. Section 1.2, 2 requirements to any off-market deal. At this point in my career, I've looked at thousands of off-market deals. Here's what I've learned. There are 2 requirements that must be present for you to get a good off-market deal. Once you know what these 2 requirements are, you can narrow your focus to only off-market deals that have these 2 requirements in place. This is going to save you time, money, effort, and headaches. The first requirement is motivation. The owner of the property has some sort of problem, and selling their property would help them solve that problem. They need to be motivated to get rid of the problem and the property. They could be motivated for any of the following reasons. They've lost their job, they inherited the property and they don't want to deal with it, moved out of state because a job offer came up, they're getting a divorce, they have health problems, the property is falling apart and they can't afford to fix it, it's currently an investment property and they don't know what they're doing, their loan is coming due and they have to pay it off, they want to retire and the property takes up too much of their time, or they need money for other expenses in life. Are we taking advantage of these people by buying their property from them? Absolutely not. We're solving these people's problems and making their life better. The only way that an off-market deal works is if it's a win-win for both you and the property seller. You have to understand this point. If you don't present solutions to other people's problems, you won't be successful. This brings me around to another point of why hunting for off-market deals is so important. In on-market deals, we rarely get to communicate with the property owner. When we want info on the property, we talk to the broker or agent that's been hired to list the property. And what motivates brokers and agents? Commissions. And how do they get commissions? By getting someone to buy the property they've listed for sale. So in the capital section, section 3 of this book, we're going to talk about creative deals that don't require you to put a lot of money down and into the properties. But agents and brokers don't like to talk to property owners about low money down deals because it normally means they're not going to get their full commission up front, and it just makes things complicated for them. For that reason, even if a creative deal does solve all of the owner's problems, the broker or agent will normally recommend the owner not take the offer. This is bad for us as investors, and it's bad for the property seller. It is good only for the broker or the agent. In off-market deals, we get to work directly with the property owner to figure out what their problems are and how we can solve those. This allows us to understand their pain points and craft an offer on properties that allow for win-win deals. Here's a quick example to illustrate my point. One of my first deals I did was an off-market storage facility. The owner was a very nice lady who'd gotten the property into divorce. She never dreamed of owning a storage facility herself, but here she was, single, approaching retirement age, with a storage facility she had no idea how to run. In other words, she was motivated to sell. Through my 4-step process of finding off-market deals that I'll share with you in the next section, I found her and worked directly with her to understand her problems. It's a huge key. I got to work directly with her and understand what she wanted. Her problems were: she had a property she didn't want. She didn't know how to properly run the business. She was not entrepreneurial and had no desires to get the skills to run it. She wanted to spend time enjoying life, not working on the property. The property needed about $40,000 worth of work, and she didn't have the cash sitting around to put the money back into the property. She needed the income from the property to live on. She couldn't let the income from the property build up in order to do the repairs herself to get to that $40,000 mark. So those were her problems. These were her goals. Her goals were: she wanted to get rid of the responsibilities of the property. She wanted to stop worrying about the needed repairs. She wanted to have some time off where she could actually enjoy herself. And she wanted to have a steady monthly income for her retirement. She was considering selling the property, but was really overwhelmed by the whole process. The property was worth around $500,000, and she owed the bank $170,000. If she sold the property through an agent, she would have had to pay a commission of $30,000, she'd have had to pay the bank off, and she would have had to pay taxes. This was all of this was discouraging for her. Once I was equipped with the knowledge of her problems and her goals, I crafted an offer that I thought would be a win for her and a win for me. I offered her a master lease. We're going to talk about this more later. I offered a master lease on the property where I would take control of the property and run the operations, and I would also put $40,000 to repair the property into it. I would pay her monthly payments to the bank every month and also give her a lease payment for a reliable monthly income directly to her. To pad her bank account, I would also give her $30,000 up front. She also told me at one point she hadn't been on a vacation in several years, so as part of the deal, I offered to buy her a cruise ticket. That got her really excited. This took care of all of her problems and helped her achieve all of her goals. For me, I got a property where I saw a direct path to making money. The income on the property could be immediately raised if the repairs were done and the property looked nicer. Remember from my first book, more income is more cash flow, and that also gives us a higher value property. There was also a huge opportunity to run the business more efficiently and make it more profitable. This is a win-win. Now, I didn't have $70,000 at the time to give her the $30,000 down and $40,000 in expenses to fix up the property. So I partnered up with other people who could provide the capital piece of the puzzle. I had the deal and the management, but I needed the capital. We were all in on the property at $540,000, and today the property is worth about $1.2 million after raising the income. That's $700,000 of equity. The project turned $70,000 investment into $700,000 of equity. These deals are out there everywhere, I promise you, but they're not going to come find you, right? You have to get off your couch and you have to go make it happen. So the first requirement was motivation. The second requirement to finding an off-market deal is that the owner has to have equity in the property. In the example I just told you about, the property is worth $500,000 and the owner owed the bank $170,000. That means she had $330,000 of equity at that time. The only way this deal, or really any deal, is possible is if they have equity. If she'd owed the bank more than $500,000, I wouldn't have been able to help her solve her problems because there was no equity. So when we're looking at on-market deals, owners and agents are hesitant to share details about how much debt they have on the property. They'll tell you it's not any of your business and to make your offer with whatever you want to make it. In off-market deals, we'll run into some resistance when asking owners how much debt they have on a property because it feels like private information. But if we can explain to them that we're going to make an offer on the property that will solve their problems and this debt information will help us make a better offer, they're usually going to give you the information on the loan. If we run into an owner who's motivated but has no equity, we unfortunately can't help solve their problems by purchasing the property. In order to do so, we'd have to overpay them for the property, and as investors, we never want to overpay for a property. We'll discuss more on this when we talk about underwriting and finding the right offer price for properties. Now, in the book, I ask you to write in the blanks below, but since you're listening to this, I want you to say it out loud, and whenever you are able to stop and write it down, I want you to write down what are the 2 requirements you have to have in order to get a good off-market deal. The 2 requirements. Awesome. Great work. Let's move on. Let's talk about how to actually go out and find these deals. Section 1.3, my 4-step process to finding off-market deals. Now that you understand what an off-market property is and the 2 requirements to the deal are, we can talk about how to get out in the world and actually find these deals. Back in the early days of my real estate career, I found an off-market house and bought it for $40,000. My strategy for this deal was to flip it for cash. This was before I learned my lesson that wealthy own properties instead of flipping it and wholesaling. I ended up not doing any work to it and sold it 3 months later for $135,000. At the time of reading this book, the house is worth $240,000 when it would have cash flow of over $1,000 a month. I wish I hadn't sold it. What an incredible deal. The question is, did I find this on Zillow? Absolutely not. It was an off-market deal, and just like how this entire book is built around the DMC framework, this section 1.3, is built around a 4-step process that I created on how to find off-market deals. This process will last the test of time, although certain techniques within each step may change as technology changes. So here's my 4-step process. Step 1, identify motivation. Step 2, get out of obscurity. Step 3, build trust. Step 4, become omnipresent. Let's go through each of these one at a time to give you an understanding of the concepts. Step 1, identify motivation. In the first step, we need to identify motivation just as we have talked about previously. Now that you understand what it means for a property owner to be motivated, how do we find those people who are actually motivated? There are a number of different ways, and each investor you may talk with may have their own favorite way of doing this, but here are some of the basic ways. 1, driving for dollars. This is when you get into your car and you drive around areas with target properties and look at property. The key here is to find a property that has some of the following characteristics. It's run down and looks like it needs many repairs. It could have a blue tarp on the roof. These indicate a sign that the homeowner has a water leak and the owner may not have the money to fix the roof. The grass and the bushes are way overgrown. It looks like the property hadn't been taken care of. The property is vacant. A great way to tell if a property or a home is vacant, if there's no cars in the driveway, but the real key I've learned to look for is that there's no trash cans outside. Whenever somebody's living in a house, they have trash cans. If there's no trash cans there, it's generally a sign that nobody lives there. Of course, they can be parked around the back or the side or whatever, but that's one thing to know. If you can't see any trash cans, it's probably a pretty good sign the house is vacant. For the example property that I bought for $40,000 and sold for $135,000, driving for dollars is how I found this deal. As I was driving around, I saw this old car in the driveway. It looked like it hadn't moved in years, and that struck me as a sign of motivation. Now, again, the list I just gave you, there was nothing about old cars abandoned in the driveways being one of the keys. You really have to become a detective here and notice things about properties that may lead to signs of motivation. There's no one size fits all. In the PDF of the book, I show you a picture of the car that was in the driveway that was actually there that I saw. The next way to find property is property for rent. So when we're out in the community running errands or going somewhere or driving for dollars, we'll often notice properties with a for rent sign out front. Getting the phone number off these signs and calling the property owner or property management company can get you people who are interested in hearing an offer. If the property has been vacant for a while, that can lead to motivation for some property owners. The next way is vacant properties. Sometimes we'll run across vacant properties while we're driving for dollars, but there are also cases where we drive by properties and can't tell that they're vacant. To go further on that search, you can buy a list of all vacant properties in your area and start getting in contact with the owners. The next way is probate. This is the process where someone who owns a property dies and their belongings become ownership of somebody else, usually their children or family. What most people don't know is that probate records are public information that can be found on the internet. I live in Georgia, so I can find my public records at www.georgiapublicnotice.com. Do a quick Google search for your state public notice and see what comes up. It may require a little digging, but I know you can figure it out. If you live in Texas, you'd go to Google and you type in Texas public notice. If you live in Florida, you'd go to Google and you type in Florida public notice. If you live in California, you'd go to Google and you type in California public notice. I think you get the point. The next way to find motivated property owners is through divorce. The same as probate, we can find divorce records on public notice records. When going through a divorce, sometimes one of the spouses will keep the property, but other times both of the spouses just want to sell the property and they're willing to sell it at a discount so they can move on with their life and just get it done. These are just a few ways we can find motivated sellers. There are more ways, and I'm certain there will be more ways created in the future as technology evolves. But the root of step number 1 is finding somebody who is motivated to sell their property. Now, step number 2 of this process is to get out of obscurity. So the question is, what is obscurity? It is defined as the state of being unknown, inconspicuous, or unimportant. Some people pride themselves on being unknown and inconspicuous. This is otherwise known as keeping a low profile. But this is not what we want when it comes to finding off-market deals. If you're unknown, if you have a low profile and the motivated sellers don't know you, guess what's going to happen? Nothing. They can't sell their property to you if they don't know who you are and what you do. So it's your job to get out of obscurity and to let these people know your name and that you can solve their problems. 90% of the people I talk to have the attitude that I don't want to bother these people. They don't want to hear from me. I'd just be annoying them. And is that true? Maybe for some percentage of the people you reach out to, some percentage of the motivated sellers. But guess what? For every person who does not want to hear from you, there are the same amount of people that do need to hear from you. They need you to come along and solve their problems. They need to strike a creative deal with you that will solve their problems. They need you. To not contact people who are showing signs of motivation is a disservice not only to yourself and the wealth of your family, but also a disservice to the seller who's out there and really needs you to make their life better by solving their problems. They need a win-win deal in their life. They need someone to help them solve their problems. So what is the actual process of getting out of obscurity? The first step to get out of obscurity is to find out who owns a property. This may sound difficult, but it's actually very easy. When you want to do this, you need to first find out what county the property is in. Once you know what county the property is in, you can go over to Google and search that county name, property records. So if I was in Atlanta is in Fulton County, Georgia, I would type in Fulton County property records. Or another thing I could type in is pay Fulton County property taxes online. I'd type that into Google. Of course, if you're not in Fulton County, you would type in whatever county that property is in. The top results on that search will take you to the county's property records where you can look up who owns each property in that county. I want you to give this a test right now by getting on your phone or your computer and searching the county you're currently in. If you're driving, don't do it. Do it when you stop. Once you're on the website, you can search by property address. And here's a pro tip. These databases are usually very particular about the way you type an address in. For that reason, I like to put in as little info as possible. So if an address I wanted to look up of a property, if I'm trying to find the owner of 4690 5th Street, Northeast Atlanta, Georgia, 30308, which is just an address in Atlanta, I would only type in 4690. Again, the full address was 4690 5th Street, Atlanta, Georgia. I would only type in 4690, and then I would hit search in that county database, and I would pick the results out of the ones that come up. A lot of time these databases can be finicky, and you may not be able to find the results, so for that reason, type in as little as possible. In those records, you'll find some great information. The most important information we need is the owner name and owner address. In the case where the owner of the property does not live at the property, you'll find two addresses. One will be the property address, and the other will be the address where the owner lives, or has their business address. Once we have this information, we can begin to contact the owner in some of the following ways. We can call them. We can find them on social media like Facebook or Instagram, and we can message them. We can text them. We can send them letters like I talked about earlier, or we can visit them in person by knocking on the door. And please be careful, use common sense when using these approaches. There are certain laws, especially in the calling and texting world, that prohibit you from spamming people, or you face fines or potentially jail time. And that's just not the world we want to be in. We want to play everything by the rules. My main point I'm trying to get across to you is that you need to find owners who may be motivated and get in contact with them to let them know you can buy properties just like theirs. I don't view this as spamming people because we've narrowed our focus down to only contacting people who we feel like need our help. If we were calling everybody without rhyme or reason, that would be spamming. That's not our intention at all. Hey, Hayden here. I just wanted to take a quick second. I hope you're enjoying this book. I'm giving you the best of the best information here. I am trying to do my own piece to get out of obscurity right now, and the way that I could really use help is if you would leave me a review on Amazon. It takes 60 seconds. It'll help this book get out of obscurity and help other new real estate investors get this same information. Thank you. So you don't have to make this getting out of obscurity more complicated than it has to be. Find a property whose owner may have motivation, find out who that person is who owns the property to contact them, then actually contact them. That is the process. Now we're going to move into the next step, which is building trust with the owner after we've gotten into contact with them. So step number 3 of the 4-step process is build trust. The average person will only buy and sell a few properties in their life. These events are big deals because most people have a lot of their personal wealth stored in properties. We must treat these transactions with both care and attention. Since the average person rarely buys and sells properties, we have to do our absolute best to show that person that we are someone they can trust. Buying a cup of coffee or a tank of gas is something that most people do weekly. Therefore, they don't bother putting much thought into what coffee shop they buy from or what gas station they stop at. However, selling your property to someone requires more thought and care. The person you're contacting may only do this 1 or 2 times in their life. Another obstacle that you're up against is that most people don't know that selling real estate off market is possible. You have to explain to the average person that you do not have to have a real estate agent or broker involved to buy and sell real estate. If you're not careful, you can be perceived as someone who's trying to scam a property owner, and that's not what we want. So what's the key to overcoming all this and not being viewed as a scammer? Become a trustworthy person in the eyes of the property owner. It sounds easy, but it can be hard if you don't give this proper care and attention. I want you to think about all the people in your life that you trust. Think about it. Think really hard about why you trust those people. In my mind, it really boils down to 2 simple things. First, you have to do what you say you're going to do. Whenever you say you're going to be somewhere, you need to be there. Second, you have to tell the truth, even when the truth is not fun to hear. Kind of a bonus section here in the real estate world and the business world is it helps to have a strong online presence. I can't tell you how many people I've met who later tell me that they've Googled me bringing up my book when I've never mentioned my book to them or my online brand. It's a very common practice these days to look up the person you're dealing with on the internet, to Google them, to look them up on Facebook or Instagram. And thankfully, that's something you can control for a very little amount of money and effort. This doesn't mean you have to write a book like me, but having a social media account or a LinkedIn page that reflects you're an active real estate investor can really help big time in building your trust with the owner. Remember this lesson anytime you're talking with a property owner. Do what you say you're going to do and be honest with them. So after we've built trust, after we've been honest and we've done what we say we're going to do, the 4th step in this process is to become omnipresent. Back when I was first getting started, I remember when I had found this property owner who was willing to sell the house to me at a really great price. After getting all the details, I knew this was going to be a great and profitable deal. After confirming the price with the property owner on the phone, I knew the next step was to make it official and put the agreement in writing. I was wanting to meet up with the seller, but he was headed out of town that day. He told me he would get back in touch with me when he got back in town, which would be sometime next week. We got the property locked up, I told my mentor. Consider this a done deal. So I sat by the phone and waited for the property seller to give me a call. And I waited. And I waited. After several weeks went by, I decided to call the property owner and see what the deal was. Sadly, I was too late. By the time I had called, the property owner had gotten a call from someone else and had made an agreement with that person to buy the property from him. My fatal mistake was lack of omnipresence. So what is omnipresence? It's being everywhere all the time. Anytime someone thinks about selling their property, they need to think of you and know that you can solve their problems. But the tricky part is figuring out how to be everywhere in a way that doesn't annoy people. This is where you have to be creative. Each and every person and situation is unique. If a seller tells you their young child loves Hot Wheel cars, you may follow up with them with a package of Hot Wheels for their kid. If you tell them that you want to go on a cruise, maybe you follow up and let them know you're willing to buy them a cruise ticket if it will get the deal done. There are infinite ways to be omnipresent. The key takeaway here is that you need to follow up with sellers many, many, many times, more than you could imagine. But the mistake that most make when following up is contacting the seller with the same exact message they did before. So switch it up, be creative, and be thoughtful. That's omnipresence, and that's how you win deals. Use my 4-part process to swim in the blue oceans of off-market deals. Now, let's go talk about where you should be looking for these off-market deals. Section 1.4, is your horse in the right race? Coaches and mentors are a life hack. Throughout my career, I've always looked for people who can teach me something that could only be learned through real-life experiences. Except I wanted to learn from their experiences, not mine. I wanted to gain the knowledge that they had acquired from being in the trenches. This is a shortcut to success, and I look for every opportunity I can find to get to my goals faster. I've had many mentors in my life, but one of the most impactful is a fellow real estate investor, Victor Minaj. Victor is the host of the Real Estate Espresso podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I listen to this podcast regularly, and I advise that you do too. Victor has taught me and continues to teach me many important lessons, but I want to share with you one of the most important lessons that he taught me that rings in my head every time I look at a deal. In the beginning of our relationship, Victor told me, "Hayden, you need to make sure your horse is in the right race." And I responded, "Victor, I don't have any horses. What are you talking about?" He said, "Real estate investing is just like a horse race. Before you go bet on a horse in any race, whether it's the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, the Belmont Stakes, or any other horse race out there, you need to know 3 things. The first you need to know is the track. How long is it? What kind of material is the track made out of? What's the weather? And how does that weather affect the track? The second thing to understand is the horse that you want to bet on. What is its bloodline? What kind of physical shape is it in? Has he had any injuries? Does he do well on this kind of track in these weather conditions? All of these are going to play a role in whether your horse will win or not. Last but not least, you need to know who the jockey is. Do they have a record of winning? Do they know how to control the horse? A great horse with a bad jockey can lose the race. I was following what Victor was telling me about a horse race, but I didn't see how this was going to help me be a successful real estate investor. Real estate investing is just like making a bet in a horse race. In order to be successful, there are 3 things you need, he told me. The first thing you need is a great market. Real estate is a local game. Remember, the most 3 important things in real estate are location, location, location. The market, which is otherwise known as the town or city, matters tremendously to the success of your investment. Your market is like the track in a horse race. The next thing you need is a great deal. The horse in the race is equal to the deal in the market. How is your property going to perform in your market? You could have a beautiful apartment building, but if it's located in a lower income area, you're going to struggle because no one who lives in that community can afford to pay the high rents on the property. How will your horse perform on the track? The final thing that's needed is proper deal management by the property owner. This is like the jockey. If you have an incredible horse that could win the race, but you have a bad jockey who doesn't know how to properly lead that horse, the horse will not win the race. That's the same for our investments. If we have a great deal, but we don't manage it correctly, we won't win the race. Or in this case, we won't have a successful investment. Then it started to make sense to me. I had been focusing solely on finding great deals and turning myself into a great manager. We're going to talk more about this in section 2. But I had little concern or thought of where those deals were located and how the market would affect my success. I was going after any property that could provide cash flow and meet my goals. I needed to start thinking more about what market I entered when I bought those properties and how those markets were performing. If you think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense. Your real estate investments serve people who live in that city where the property is located. That's unless you have a hotel, RV park, or Airbnb, and in that case, the town visitors need a reason to visit, so the market is still important. Your goal as an investor is to maximize the income and value of your property, so you have to determine before you buy that property if the demographics will meet the criteria you need in order to have a successful investment. The factors you need to study before entering a market are population size, population growth as a percentage, population growth as a number, household average income, household median income, number of jobs, diversity of jobs, and job growth. There is no one formula that you can follow to give you a definite yes or no answer, but the measurements on these will give you great insight into what's going on inside a market. Use some logic when analyzing these numbers. What is the median household income? If it's $30,000 a year, which is less than the national average, do you think that you will find success in that market with a $3,000 a month apartment? Probably not, because the rents of your apartment alone would cost more than the median household makes. Sure, you may find a few people in the market that can afford to rent from you, but you don't want to have a small number of potential tenants. You want to have a lot of people who are your potential tenants. Is the number of jobs growing or declining? It's scary to own property in towns where the jobs are leaving. For the health of the local market economy, we want to make sure that more jobs are coming into town than leaving. This will give the people that live in the market more money, create more tax revenue for the local government, and therefore improve the quality of that town. As an investor, you always need to be aware of what's happening in the bigger picture for the markets you want to invest in. Remember, we will own these cash flow investments for a considerable amount of time, and we want to make sure the markets we are buying in are going to be better in the future than they are today. People want to live in great markets. As more people want to move into a town, the prices of real estates and rents get driven up. You want to ride the wave of a market that is growing in both population and income. Don't get into markets that have a declining population and is losing jobs. That's like getting in a boat that already has a hole in it. It's not going to end well, and the signs are already there. Of course, the market is just one piece. As we've been talking about, you have to find a great deal and have proper management in place. Now that you know the importance of a good market, let's talk about the different types of deals you can invest in. Section 1.5, Deal Types. Now that you understand you need to be looking for off-market deals with motivation and equity in the markets with the right demographics, it's time to talk about what kind of deals are out there for you to invest in. The world of real estate is huge, and there are so many different options and opportunities. I wanted to create this section to give you the pros and cons of the different types of deals. Like we talked about in my last book, residential deals are based on fair market value, abbreviated FMV, where the value of a home is determined by how much someone is willing to pay for it. We can find that people are willing to pay for a home by running comps, essentially looking at what other people have paid for homes similar to ours in the local area. Then we want to add and subtract value for variations such as size of the home, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, size of the lot, quality of finishes, and general condition of the property. Commercial deals, on the other hand, are based on how much income they produce and how much investors are willing to pay to buy that stream of income. For example, if a property produces $100,000 a year after all expenses are paid, and an investor requires a 7% return on this property type in this area, we can determine the value. We would calculate the value by taking $100,000 and dividing it by 7%. This would give us $1,428,571. We go over this in depth in my last book. If you like a free digital or audiobook copy of it, you can get it absolutely free. Go to haydencrabtree.com/free book. My goal for everyone is to become a commercial investor because that's where the most wealth can be created. Inside the commercial world, we have many different types of projects, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. The different types of commercial properties are multifamily, self-storage, retail, mixed use, industrial, commercial land, hotels, mobile home parks, RV parks, office buildings, hospitality, medical buildings, and restaurants. And then inside each of these, we have to be aware if the property will be a single tenant property or a multi-tenant property and how that will impact the investment. Then there are different types of leases. We could have short-term leases that only last a few days, or we could have properties that have leases for 5, 10, or even 20 years on them. The other aspect of leases is what kind they will be. Will it be a gross lease, a gross modified lease, or a triple net lease? So if you go to the PDF book, which you guys can get for free, I want you to go and look on this page. We have a continuum here. On the left side of the continuum is a gross lease. On the right side of a continuum is a triple net lease. This is also written as NNN in all capital. And in the middle of those two, we have gross modified lease, okay? Starting on the left with the gross lease, this means that the tenant agrees to pay rent to the landlord and is the only expense the tenant is responsible for. All they have to pay is the rent. In a gross lease, the property owner, the investor, has to pay for property taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, utilities, and all other costs that come along with owning that particular kind of property. Now, if we jump over to the far right side of the continuum, let's talk quickly about triple net leases. Okay, NNN, all capitals, is how it's written, but it would be called triple net when spoken. In a triple net lease agreement, the tenant, the person renting the building, agrees to pay the landlord, you, the investor, a set amount of rent each month, but they're also going to be responsible for all expenses as they arise. They're going to pay for property taxes, they're going to pay for insurance, they're going to pay for repairs, they pay for everything. So what this means is that when you're buying a property with a triple net tenant, the income is equal to the NOI. Remember that income minus expenses equals your NOI. Well, in triple net leases, there's no expenses. It's only income. Now, if we jump in the middle between these two and talk quickly about gross modified leases. Gross modified leases can be anywhere between gross leases and triple net. So the tenant is going to pay some amount in rent, and then the two parties, the tenant and the landlord, the property owner, will negotiate what else the tenant will be responsible for and what the landlord will be responsible for. I've seen many times that the tenant is responsible for all repairs, maintenance, and utilities on the property. The only exception of what the tenant is responsible for is the air conditioning or the HVAC system or the roof if the roof has any problems. If either of those do have problems, then the landlord has to step in and pay for the work. When you're looking at retail, office, industrial, restaurants, medical, and mixed-use properties, you need to be aware of what leases are already in place, meaning the tenants in the properties, what is their current agreement, and how will that affect your deal strategy, which we're about to go into, and the financials on the property. Be sure to include the proper expenses you'll be responsible for as a potential new owner as it relates to the lease type. Section 1.6, Deal Strategies. Next up, we're going to focus on the different strategies you can use as a real estate investor. The end goal is all the same, to build wealth and cash flow to improve your life. We have to acknowledge that all real estate deals are unique, and therefore we cannot use any strategy on any deal. The deal has to be right for the strategy. There are 4 different strategies we can use to create cash flow and wealth. Some deals only fit the criteria for one of the 4 strategies, and other times a deal will give you multiple options and it's up to you to determine which route you want to take. So the 4 strategies are: number 1, turnkey; number 2, stabilized; number 3, value add; and the 4th strategy is development, redevelopment, expansion. Let's go through each of these strategies to give you a better sense of what each is about and which is right for you. Turnkey. Turnkey deals are just what they sound like. Everything is already taken care of for you. All you have to do is buy the property and turn the key. When buying a turnkey property, you're buying a property that's physically ready to rent, and hopefully the property is already rented and producing cash flow. The property is already being managed by a property management company, and you're buying the full package. All systems are in place, and nothing is going to change for the tenant or tenants that are in the property the day that you buy it. Turnkey properties require the least amount of work for you as the purchaser of the property. In return for little work, there's also likely to be little returns. It's possible to acquire turnkey properties at a price that gets you a good return, but it's difficult because most people who own turnkey properties are not going to be motivated. Remember, the key to getting a great deal is motivation on the part of the owner. Another reason it's difficult to get good deals on turnkey properties is because most of the people selling turnkey properties are real estate investors who did all the work of fixing up the property, putting property management in place, and getting it rented. Because they're real estate investors, they know exactly what they can sell the property for and give you, the buyer, the average rate of return in the market. Turnkey is for you if you're low on time, you're able to spend, and you're willing to accept lower returns. In my eyes, this still beats stock investing. You still get to take advantage of debt paydown, property appreciation, inflation protection, tax benefits, monthly cash flow, and you get a physical asset. The returns are just going to be lower than the other strategies of real estate investing that we're about to go over. All right, our next strategy is stabilized. A property that needs no or minor physical work but does not have a property management company or systems in place is what we call a stabilized property. It may or may not be rented, but the key is that it can be rented very quickly because it does not have many needs on the construction side. Stabilized properties are great investments for people who do not want to go through the process of fixing up properties, but also hope to buy at a price where they can make good returns. An example of a stabilized property could be a landlord who's ready to retire decides to sell a rental property. They've been doing the property management themselves and will no longer continue to do so when they retire. The property could have a tenant in it at the moment, and all you need to do is buy the property and figure out the management aspect, which we're going to go in deeper in section 2. That example would be from the residential world, but remember that all of these strategies apply both to residential and commercial. An example in a commercial property could be that an investor who owns a number of commercial properties decides to let one of his properties go because he has a need for capital on another one of his projects. He has a number of employees that work directly for him on all of his portfolio. Upon selling the property you're buying from him, he'll discontinue managing the property. You'll have to take this responsibility on and either do the same thing he did by having your own employees do it for you or hire a property management company. The best way to earn a higher return on a stabilized property is to purchase it for less than it's worth. Our next strategy is value add. It's hard to describe exactly what a value add project is because it can come in so many different forms. Your ability to add value as a real estate investor is endless. In residential, we may be able to remodel the home and increase the fair market value and the rental rate. In commercial, we have similar options as residential. We can remodel buildings to make them more appealing and increase the rental rate. A great option in commercial properties is to find ways to get more money out of your existing customers with little or no money required. So what do I mean by this? In chapter 34 of my last book, I gave an example of how an apartment complex I live in started doing what they called valet trash service. Essentially, they would come around every night and pick up your trash and take it to the dumpster for you. For doing this, they charged you, as the person living in the apartment, $25 a month. This property had 196 units, and we estimated that this would cost the property owner $40 a day in labor to go around and collect the trash. In our calculations, we estimated this would add $44,200 to the NOI of the property, which increased the annual cash flow by $44,200 also. But more importantly, it added $736,667 of value to the property on a 6 cap rate. I love this strategy because it got more money out of the existing tenants without having to spend any money at all to generate more income. Sure, the apartment complex has to pay someone every week to pick up the trash, but it didn't cost them anything up front in terms of an investment to implement this policy and add this stream of income. Let's do a comparison. If the property owner had decided to remodel the exterior of the building and was hoping to increase the rental rates by $25 a unit. So in the book, we have a little graph here. I'm going to read through it. So we're going to go cost of value add. To remodel the exterior, let's say it would cost $300,000. This is a 196 unit apartment building. $300,000 to fix up the outside of the building. The increase in income would be the same, $25 a unit. That's $58,800 a year of additional income. If we remodel the exterior, our expenses, our ongoing operational expenses are not going to increase at all. We don't have to pay anything every month because we invested the money up front. So that means our increase in NOI is directly related to the increase in income, which is $58,800. On a 6 cap, that $58,800 of NOI would increase the value by $980,000, almost $1 million. So our return on investment in terms of how much we had to spend, the $300,000 to the increase in property value, $980,000, that's a 226% return on investment. Okay. Now, let's analyze for the valet trash. The cost of the value add is $0. We didn't have to spend anything up front to get it. The increase in the income is the same, $58,800. But for the valet trash, we have an increase in expenses. That's $14,600 a year, which means our increase in NOI is $44,200, and our increase in property value is $736,667. But our return on investment, our increase in value divided by our cost, is infinite. We can't calculate it because we didn't have to invest any money up front to add value, income, and NOI to the property. So as you can see, there's quite a difference between these two types of value add. If the property owner were to remodel the exterior, they'd be able to increase the income by the same amount, $25 a unit every single month for 196 units. That'd be an extra $58,800 a year. In the case of the exterior remodel, the landlord had to spend $300,000 to improve the building, but this was a great investment because the additional $58,800 of NOI boosted the property value by $980,000. The great thing about the exterior remodel is that we didn't add any additional operating expenses for the property owner. All the additional rent they were able to charge does not come with any extra cost. So here are just two types of value add. In the case of the exterior remodel, we had to spend $300,000, but we got to keep all the income that's generated because no ongoing expenses. In the case of the trash service, we didn't have to spend any money up front to put this value add into action, but we had to do some extra management duties and we have an ongoing expense. Both of these are financially great options for the property owner. In fact, they should do both. If the owner were to do both of these things, here's what the financial benefit would look like. The cost of the value add total would be $300,000. The increase in the income would be $117,600 a year. The increase in expenses would only be $14,600 a year. The increase in the NOI would be $103,000 a year. The increase in the value of the property would be $1,716,667. And the return on investment of both of these value add projects combined would be 472%. Value add projects are powerful. This is where tremendous money can be made in real estate investing in a short period of time. In turnkey and stabilized deals, you're still making great investments and getting income, depreciation, equity buildup, appreciation, and using leverage. But in value add deals, you're supercharging your wealth building. Both in commercial and residential, the most preferred way to add value is by buying a great property that doesn't need a lot of work and has below market rates. Similar to the exterior remodel, you get to raise the income and you have no additional expenses. But with below market rates, you don't have to spend any money to increase the income. It's really the best of both worlds. So what are below market rates? Imagine you're looking to rent an apartment. You know which zip code you want to live in. You're searching on the internet for 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments. The first one you look at is $2,000 a month. The next one you look at is $1,950 a month. The one after that is $2,100 a month. Then you find one that looks just like all the others, but it's only $1,500 a month. In this situation, the market rent is around $2,000 for 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments in this zip code. The property you found that will rent the same size apartment for $1,500 is what we call below market rates. As an investor, I love properties with below market rates. They are powerful wealth building investments when you raise the rents to market rate. But raising rents, collecting trash, and remodeling exteriors are just the surface of value add investing. There are so many different tactics and strategies. Your ability to add value is limited only by your creativity. Of course, we want to execute on value add in a profitable way. If we have to spend $300,000 on improvement and it only raises the property value by $100,000, then that's not a good investment. The bottom line of value add investing is this: what can you do to a property to profitably increase its value and cash flows? That's value add investing. Our next strategy is development, redevelopment, and expansion. The final strategy that you can use as a real estate investor is developing, redeveloping, and expanding property. The desired outcome is the same as the value add strategy. How can I raise the income and value of this property more than what it costs me to develop or redevelop the property? But the difference in value add versus this is that we're going to build more buildings, or we're going to do a major overhaul of the current property. Let's talk about what developing property is and what it entails. Then we'll do the same for expansion and redevelopment. The most famous people in the real estate industry are the big developers. That's because they take on projects where the returns are huge. But what most people don't realize is that the risk can be huge too if you aren't aware of what you're doing. The goal of developing property is to build a product in a market that is needed. That's a huge point. That is needed. The basics of developments go back to the basics of economics. What is the supply and what is the demand? If there is less demand than there is supply in the market, you'd be a bad investor to spend your time, energy, and money on building that kind of real estate. If there is more demand than there is supply, then you could have a great development project. I say could because there are several other factors, specifically, what are the economics of developing the property? We have obvious costs associated with developing property, buying the land, and the cost of materials and construction. So for example, let's say we want to build a 10-unit apartment building. We determine that the building will be worth $1 million when we're done. We go out and we find some land for $250,000. We get estimates that the building materials and construction will cost $500,000. At first glance, this seems like a great project. Our total cost will be $750,000 and the value will be $1 million, which leaves us with a $250,000 profit. This project seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, not so fast. We've gone past a couple steps here. First, we're going to have to get the site engineered and approved by the local government. Let's call that $25,000. In the approval process, the government lets us know that we need a bigger stormwater system to handle the water when it rains. This is going to add another $30,000 to the construction costs. So we revise our plans to get the government approval for the new site. Our costs have now gone up while our profit has gone down by $55,000, but we still have an estimated profit of $195,000. We now tell the government we want to get our project permitted and start building. They approve our permits and let us know the permit fees are $15,000 and the impact fees are another $10,000. Ouch, there's another $25,000 out of our profit. We push forward, still looking at $170,000 of profit. We pay the fees and start building. We're celebrating, counting all the money we're going to make in our head once this project gets finished. On a random day, you get a call from your general contractor where he lets you know there's been a problem. The crew that was supposed to do your electrical work has not shown up for the last week, and the project is running behind schedule. Not to worry though, he already called another crew, but they'll be $10,000 more expensive. They're also working on another job right now and can come to your job in 2 weeks. What do you want to do? Now you have to consider how much you're going to spend while you wait on payments to the bank, property taxes, and insurance. Let's say that every week you wait will cost $1,000. These are called holding costs, and they can eat you alive if you aren't careful. With the original crew not responding, you tell the general contractor to go forward with the new electrical crew. This results in $12,000 more in expenses, $2,000 to holding costs, and $10,000 more for the work. Profit is now down to $158,000. Should I keep going? Listen, my point isn't to be doom and gloom on real estate investing, but the purpose of me telling you this is to show you that real estate development comes with real risks that could cost you real money. A project that looks profitable can really be a money pit. Does that mean that you shouldn't try and be a real estate developer? No. I love developing property. It's fun, it's exciting, and can be the most profitable form of real estate investing, but it requires a large amount of upfront time, and you have to be comfortable with unexpected costs. And you have to be able to fund these unexpected costs or else your project will never get completed. Developing property should be something you look into doing once you're financially stable and willing to wait longer in order to receive a return on your invested money. Going from idea to cash flow on a real estate development will take a minimum of a year, most likely 2 years on average, and sometimes 3+ years depending on the size of the project and how many approvals you have to get from the government. You got it? Great. Now what about expansion? Expansion is a great way for an investor to get their feet wet in developing property without taking on the risks that are so large. Of course, the math has to work out, but what is so powerful about the expansion strategy is that we can buy a piece of property that is already cash flowing and build more units on it. Let's take an example of a 10-unit apartment building that sits on 2 acres. Let's assume the building is already full of paying tenants and it's cash flowing. We can buy it at a price that makes it a good investment. When we're looking to buy the building, we find out the current zoning allows for 10 units per acre. That means that our property has the potential to have a total of 20 units on it. So when buying the property, we can decide to leave it as it sits with just 10 units, or we could run the numbers and see if it makes financial sense to build another 10 units, bringing the total to 20 units. Either way, the building cash flows as it sits. That's why expansion can be so powerful. You can buy cash flow and still have the financial upside of development. Will you still have to deal with the government and be hit with unexpected costs along the way? Absolutely you will. But those delays and extra costs hurt a lot less when the property is producing cash flow already. Instead of $1,000 a week of holding costs, you could have $1,000 a week of cash flow, and that's a big difference. By the way, expansion doesn't mean you have to build the same thing you already have. In the case of the 10-unit apartment building, you may decide that you're going to build 50 storage units on the property rather than 10 more apartments. Of course, you'll have to check and make sure the local zoning for the property allows it. You should always expand your property based on supply and demand. If your 10 apartments are normally 70% full and you can never get them to 90 or 100% occupied, why would you build more apartments? Don't build something that you're not going to be able to rent out and generate income. You may find that the storage property down the street from your property is always 100% full and they have a waiting list. Ding, 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 I smell some demand. Now that you get the gist of expansion, let's talk about redevelopment. I'll illustrate what redevelopment is with a story of a project my friend is doing. In his town, there's this really old industrial building where they used to produce the coating that goes around the outside of the electrical wire, the coating that keeps you from getting shocked by electricity if you're to touch a wire as power runs through it. Anyways, that service is now done overseas, and the building has been sitting vacant for over a decade. It's a huge building and property. The building is over 200,000 square feet, and that's more than 4 football fields of space. The building has become an eyesore for the town since no one was doing upkeep. My friend knew that the project was in a great market and there was demand for warehouse space and retail space in his town, but there was no demand for 200,000 square feet industrial centers. So we took the property, put up a bunch of walls in the old building to break the space down into smaller chunks, updated the roof and the exterior, and started renting out smaller spaces in sizes that were actually in demand. He redeveloped this property. He took what was there, changed it significantly, but still kept a majority of the original building and created a new piece of property to rent out. This is what redevelopment is, taking something that's outdated and finding a better use for it. Sure, he could have kept the property as one big space and tried to find a tenant who would rent the whole thing out, but that was not what was in the highest demand. It probably would have taken him a year more to find a tenant who would rent from him, and he'd probably been able to generate, say, $1 million a year of rental income on that 200,000 square feet. But because he developed the property into something with a higher demand, he leased a majority of the space out before he was even done with construction. Not to mention that he'll generate double or triple the $1 million a year of rental income from the property because the space that's in higher demand is more expensive and provides more income to the landlord. Do all redevelopment projects have to be huge old warehouses? Absolutely not. I've seen redevelopment projects that take small old mills on the river and turn them into 6 or 8 unit apartment buildings. The possibility here are endless. Because the nature of redevelopment is taking an existing building and converting it into a new use, we need 3 things. First, we need to make sure the government will allow our intended use. If we want to take an old mill and make it into apartments, will the government let us do that? That depends on the zoning, so we have to check with the zoning department. Second, we want to make sure the structure itself can physically support what we want to do and that it's not going to cost so much money that the project will not have any profit. The third item is that the project has demand. Just because it would be cool to turn an old mill into apartments doesn't mean that's a good investment. Now you know the 4 strategies you can employ as a real estate investor. They are turnkey, stabilized, value add, development, redevelopment, and expansion. Now you know the 4 strategies as a real estate investor. Let's move on and talk about how to get your first deal closed. Section 1.7, to the closing table. The road to closing your first deal can be a difficult and expensive one without the proper knowledge and understanding of what steps you need to take and when. This section will be extremely valuable for you, especially if you've never closed a deal before or you're overwhelmed by taking those first steps. As a real estate investor, you have 2 different phases you need to navigate through in order to close a deal successfully. First phase is called pre-contract. This is what you'll need to do prior to locking a property up. When we say locking a property up, that means putting it under contract, securing the deal. Phase number 2, contract to close. This is everything you'll need to do once you secure a deal and prepare to successfully close the deal. Phase 1, pre-contract. The first phase is all the work that needs to be done in order to get to a contract. The contract is the document that legally binds the current owner of the property and you, as the buyer, to the obligation of buying and selling a piece of property. Getting a contract on a property that will produce profits requires knowledge and hard work, but anyone can do it. Knowing how to navigate this pre-contract phase is potentially the most important part of the entire process. In order to achieve any goal, we must first know what that goal is. Your real estate goals could be any of the following: to make an extra $10,000 a year of cash flow, to make $250,000 over the next 3 years, to acquire 10 units, to earn a 10% cash on your invested money, to hit a 15% IRR on your portfolio, to quit your day job and to become a full-time real estate investor. All of these are great goals, but in order to achieve them, we first need to write it down and gain clarity around what we want to achieve. The quickest way to not achieve your goals is to not know what they are. By getting complete clarity on what you want, you can activate your brain to look for deals that will allow you to accomplish your goals. With that said, the first step of the pre-contract phase is to know your goal. Do it now. What is your real estate goal? If you're listening to the audiobook, you need to find a place to write this down. You can say it out loud right now. You can think about it all you want. Goals become real when you write them down. So if you're driving, as soon as you get done, I want you to stop and write it down, preferably with a pen and paper, and post it somewhere. Once that's done, you can move on to step number 2, which is find a deal. That's what we've been talking about in the previous sections, how to find off-market deals that have the highest chance of having a high financial return and will allow you to hit your goals. Take action by putting those lessons on off-market deals to work. Once you have deals in your pipeline, it's time to start building the skill that most successful real estate investors have: the ability to analyze a deal and know quickly whether that deal is a profitable one or not. Not only do they need to know if it's going to be profitable or not, they also need to find out if it's going to meet or exceed their goals. In order to do this, we have to move on to step number 3, which is underwrite deals. Underwriting is a technical word for analyzing a deal and understanding how it's going to perform financially. There are many back-of-napkin ways to analyze a deal and understand if it's profitable or not. The most famous back-of-napkin analysis is the 1% rule. This means the income from the property for 1 month should be equal to 1% of the price you pay for the property. If a property has a tenant in it paying $1,000 a month in rent, according to the 1% rule, you'll be able to pay $100,000 for the property. What we do is we take $1,000, which is the monthly rent, and divide it by 1%. That would give us $100,000. I would strongly advise against the 1% rule. It does not take into account all the different factors you need to consider when underwriting a property. There are 7 main components you need to understand to properly underwrite a deal. 1. Property value. 2. Current income and market rate income. 3. Expenses. 4. Financing strategy and costs. 5. Closing costs. 6. Cost of needed work, physical work that needs to be done on the property. And 7. Price paid for the deal. What you need to do in order to fully underwrite a deal is take all 7 of these components and plug them into a pro forma. This will help you understand how they can all interact and work with each other. A change in just one of the 7 components can alter the entire financial picture of a deal. A pro forma that's set up correctly will also tell you metrics like cash on cash, internal rate of return, debt service coverage ratio, and equity multiple. The foundation of great real estate investing is a pro forma. The pro forma is the roadmap of what kind of money you can expect to make and when you can expect to make it. All of these 7 elements above are critical in getting an accurate pro forma and having confidence in your numbers. Notice how component number 7, the last component, is the price paid. The reason this comes last on the list is because there's a price in which almost every deal makes financial sense. The price that a seller is wanting you to pay for it might not make financial sense, but at some price of buying that deal will make sense, financial sense, for you to buy it. It's your job as an investor to find out what price is the price that makes sense. A pro forma will guide you to that price. The big lesson here: it's your job to acquire property at a price that's going to allow you to hit your financial goals. Proper underwriting is going to allow you to determine the maximum purchase price you can pay and hit your goals. This will allow you to move forward with confidence. A great saying in real estate is you make your money when you buy, meaning the most important factor to a profitable investment is how much you pay for it. I want to show you the full underwriting process, but that could be another book all on its own. So instead, I made an in-depth video course for you talking about these 7 components, how to plug them into a pro forma, and analyze the results. It's called the Deal Analysis Masterclass. The Deal Analysis Masterclass is an over-the-shoulder look at the personal process I use to find, analyze, and ultimately acquire profitable properties. In the masterclass, I'm going to show you how to conduct a deep dive into each of the 7 components you need to underwrite a property, how to create a pro forma from scratch, and I'll even include the exact pro forma template I use to analyze deals, saving you a minimum of 3 hours, how to calculate your ideal target acquisition price for any property, how leveraging bank money can massively increase the profitability of your deal, and more. This Deal Analysis Masterclass is being sold to the public for $997 right now, and investors are enrolling in this masterclass every day. But because you're a reader of this book and you've made it this far, I want to do something special. I want to give you lifetime access to my Deal Analysis Masterclass 100% free of charge. That's only if you promise to use it and promise not to share this with anybody else. To get it, go to haydencrabtree.com/deal analysis and enter in the coupon code STF2. That's skip the flip 2 abbreviated, STF2, at checkout for a 100% discount, no credit cards required. After you underwrite the property and find a price through underwriting that meets your goals, you move on to step number 4, which is make an offer. This is where you tell the owner of a property how much you will pay them. Making your first offer can be a nerve-wracking experience, but hopefully we can make it an easier process with a few tips here. First thing you need to know is that making offers are non-binding. This means that you are just making an offer and seeing if the seller will accept your offer or not. Just because you make an offer does not mean you actually have to perform on that offer. For the sake of your reputation and fair treatment of others, I don't advise you make offers that you don't plan on fulfilling. But it's always nice to know that just because you make an offer, that does not mean you will lose money if you actually can't perform. And when I say perform, I mean you can't actually buy the property because you don't have the money, because you can't get the financing, for whatever reasons. That's what it means to perform, to buy the property. The purpose of making offers is simple. Will the owner accept what I'm willing to pay them for the property on the terms I am willing to give them? We want to know where we stand. It's like asking your crush out on a date. You don't know if they'll go out with you until you ask. So you have to ask or you'll never know and you'll never make it happen. Offers are sometimes made verbally. For example, you call a seller and you tell them, hey, I'll give you $100,000 for your property. But this is a rookie mistake. You can make offers verbally, but you should always, always, always make your offer in writing in addition to verbally. Why? Why should you make it in writing? Because people believe what they see. It's fine if you tell somebody you'll buy their property for $100,000, but if you want to be taken seriously, you need to put that offer in writing and sign your signature on the bottom of that paper. Let them see your offer, not just hear it. We make offers on properties through a document called a letter of intent, or LOI for short. The LOI is normally a non-binding document, but it can really boost your credibility with the seller to have your offer written up formally and presented. In addition to how much you're willing to pay, the LOI will include a few other aspects of the deal you're proposing to the new owner. The other important aspects of the LOI are what we call terms. Terms are all the other details that are important to the transaction besides the price you will pay. Here are some common terms. Earnest money. This is a deposit you're willing to give to an escrow agent when the contract is signed. The purpose of earnest money is to show you're serious about purchasing the property. If you fail to close the deal, you could have to give the earnest money to the seller. That can be prevented by having contingencies in the contract. Contingencies. We'll go through many of these contingencies in Phase 2, contract to close. The main point that we want to get across in our LOI is that we need for certain things to happen in order for us to buy the property. We may have a financing contingency, which means that we need to be able to get a loan from the bank before buying the property. If we can't get a loan, then we can back out of the deal with no penalty. We can also have an inspection contingency, which means that if the property has too many things wrong with it, we can back out of the deal. Contingencies are good for the buyer, you, and bad for the seller. For this reason, sellers like to have offers with few to no contingencies. Timing. We have to tell the seller how long we need for our contingencies and to close the property. If a seller is motivated to sell because they need the money and they have two offers on the property at the same price, they are likely to take the offer with the shortest time frame on it so they can get their money sooner. But you as the buyer would like to have as much time as possible so that you can reduce your risk by performing due diligence. More on this in a minute. The last part of timing is letting the seller know how long the offer you're making is good for. We don't always want to make open-ended offers to people because the offers we're making today may not be available next month. If we make an offer and the seller says, maybe, let me think about it, you don't want to be waiting on that answer from them forever. You'll want to know if you're going to be investing capital, time, and energy in this deal, if you have to move on to another deal. For that reason, we always want to put a time limit on how long our offers are good for. Payment terms. We're going to dive into different ways you can pay for a property in Section 3, which is the financing section, the capital section. For now, you just need to know that you need to include how you're going to pay the owner for the property as a part of your LOI. After you finish Section 3, come back and listen to this section again. I hope with these tips you can get more comfortable with making offers. For picking up a copy of this book, I'll give you the LOI template that I personally use for free, the document. I hope it helps you achieve financial freedom. Go get that LOI template at haydencrabtree.com/resources. I'll also make a video of how to fill it out. Let's quickly recap Phase 1 pre-contract. Step number 1, know your goal. Step number 2, find a deal. Step number 3, underwrite the deal. Step number 4, make an offer. Great. Now you know all the work that has to be done before you get to make a deal official. Let's move on to Phase number 2, contract to close. Phase 2, contract to close. The pre-contract period is filled with hustle, looking for deals, talking with sellers, researching properties, underwriting deals, making offers, rinse and repeat as you work to find a seller who will sell to you at a price that meets your goals. None of this is complicated, but it takes work. There's also not a lot of risk involved because the biggest investment you're going to make is your time. Once we get an offer accepted, we have to become more refined. Double check the numbers, understand exactly what kind of shape the property's in. To help guide you through this process and help you minimize your risk, let's walk through the 6 steps of the contract to close phase. Number 1, bind the contract. Number 2, physical due diligence. Number 3, financial due diligence. Number 4, arrange financing. Number 5, title work. Number 6, close the deal. Here we go. Step 1, bind the contract. When a contract is signed by all parties and in full effect, that's known as binding. If you have an agreement with the property seller, but you don't have a contract signed by them, you do not yet have a deal. I cannot stress the importance of this. You need to get a contract signed before you dive into the next steps of the contract to close phase. There are numerous elements in a contract that are negotiated point, but as long as you follow through on presenting an LOI and coming to an agreement on those terms, you have a great head start on an easy contract negotiation. One thing that most people don't know is that even if you and the other person both sign the contract, if you have not submitted your earnest money, the contract is not valid. In order for a contract to be legally binding, some form of value has to be exchanged. So never ever write a contract and do not include any earnest money. Also, never delay or forget to submit your earnest money. That's a free ticket for the seller to break your agreement and not have any consequences whatsoever. After we get a binding contract, we may feel like celebrating. Indeed, it's a great feeling to have a binding contract on investment property, but don't celebrate too long. You have more work to do before you start making money. After your contract is signed, you need to create what is called a critical dates timeline, where you'll map out all the important dates for your property. There are a few different critical dates we need to understand before we can map them out. Most contracts are written like this. Buyer has 3 days to submit earnest money. 30 days after binding, the due diligence period shall expire. 60 days after binding, the financing contingency shall expire. This transaction shall occur 90 days after binding. Don't let this overwhelm you. Let's talk through each of these. First thing you need to understand is what the binding date is. If a contract is written on January 1st and signed by you and the seller on the same date, the binding of that contract will be January 1st. But in real life, people don't sign the contract on the day that it's written. It may actually go like this. The contract is written on January 1st. You, the buyer, sign it on January 2nd because that's when you could get to a computer, and the seller signs the contract on January 5th because they needed to have somebody else review it. In this case, the contract binding date is January 5th when the last party signs the contract. Also, as a side note here, it's always considered normal for the buyer, you, to sign the contract before you ask the seller to sign it. Now that we know exactly when the contract binds, we can map out the dates. Contract binding, which was January 5th, plus 3 days, that's January 8th is when we need to submit our earnest money. Now the contract binding plus 30 days, that's February 4th. This is when our due diligence ends. The contract binding date plus 60 days, that comes out to March 6th. That's when our financing contingency ends. The contract binding date plus 90 days is April 5th. That's when we need to close this deal by. These examples are for a non-leap year. If we had a leap year, the finance contingency and the date to close would be moved up to March 5th and April 4th, respectively. We need to keep these dates in front of us and be aware of where we are in the process. As an investor, you have to perform due diligence. This is where you need to do your homework to make sure the property is what you really thought it was when you made the offer. If you find out during your due diligence that the property has some issues you didn't know about when you made your first offer, you're allowed to cancel the contract and get back your earnest money. But if you find something after the due diligence period ends that makes you want to cancel the contract, you can still cancel it, but you'll have to give your earnest money to the seller. That is no longer your money. After the due diligence period is up, we refer to your earnest money as going hard. When your earnest money has gone hard, it's no longer yours if you don't buy the property. If you do buy the property, the money will be applied towards your down payment on the purchase and you've not lost anything. This is the importance of the critical dates timeline, keeping in mind when you need to have certain deadlines met. We're going to move into the next steps, but in reality, these steps should all be done and happening at the same time. Don't wait for step number 2 to finish before starting step number 3. Does that make sense? With that said, step number 2 is physical due diligence. Physical due diligence is very important because we want to make sure that the property we're buying does not have some major work on it that needs to be done. There are many different circumstances where you cannot look inside of a property before making an offer on it. So you make your best offer based on the condition that the seller tells you the property's in, yet when you get inside, you may find out the property needs a whole lot of work. If you originally only estimated the property needs $5,000 worth of work and you find it's really going to cost $20,000, then the deal has changed. Anytime you find out new information in your due diligence, you need to go back to your pro forma and update the numbers. If you find that you update the pro forma with bad news, like an increase from $5,000 to $20,000 of the work that's needed, and the property now does not hit your return numbers you'd like to have to meet your goals, you have two options. Number one, you can ask the seller to lower the price so you can hit your goals because you were given bad information. Or number two, you can cancel the contract. Either way, it is critically important that you conduct your physical due diligence prior to your earnest money going hard so you don't lose those funds. A great first step in your physical due diligence is asking the property owner what they know of that needs work, what's working, what's not working. If they have a tenant in the property currently, be sure to ask them what they know of on the property that needs work. Ask the tenant that. Next up would be to get a physical property inspection done. This will cost you several hundred to several $1,000s depending on the property type and size, but this is a part of your investment. This is not an expense. So on homes, they're normally a couple $100. On larger commercial properties, that can be a couple $1,000. If the property report comes back with a lot of problems that you weren't aware of, count your blessings. Count your blessings that they were not found after you bought the property, but instead that you found them before you bought the property. You'll also need to use the time period to get estimates and quotes from contractors for any work that needs to be done, whether you plan to upgrade the property to increase the rent or if there's just some items that need to get fixed and back to normal. If you ask the right questions before you make offers on properties, this stage should not be filled with a lot of surprises. During the same time that you're getting your inspections and your estimates, you need to start on step number 3, which is financial due diligence. This financial due diligence is where we want to ensure that our underwriting is correct. You need to review any and all leases that are currently in place on the property. If there are any tenants that have multi-year leases, you need to make sure your pro forma accurately reflects the rate the tenant is paying and any predetermined rent raises or lack of rent raises. If the property is vacant with no tenants, you need to talk to local experts and verify the rental amount you're projecting is realistic for the property. What we're trying to find out here is what the true market rate is for your rental. If the property is vacant and you can get the current owner to allow it, it's always a great head start to try and lease the property while under due diligence. It's always better to have actual paying tenants rather than projections when you can. After you confirm the income, you need to move on to verifying the expenses. If the property owner has it, it would be helpful to have their tax returns or their profit and loss statement from the last few years. This way you can verify how much the property has been spending on different costs recently. Of course, we have to apply some logic here. If the current owner is not paying for property management because they're doing it themselves, and we plan to have property managers, we need to make sure our pro forma reflects that property management expense. We may also find out where the current owner is spending money that could be a reduced expense for us, and that could increase our returns. The vendors working on the property could be charging a higher price than their competition, and you could increase the profitability of your property by shopping that around during due diligence. Anytime you find any differences, make sure to go back and update the pro forma. Do you want to know what one mistake I see new investors make all the time that can easily be avoided on their expenses? Check out mypropertystats.com/DD mistakes now so that you can avoid this costly mistake on your next deal. Again, that's mypropertystats.com/DD mistakes so you can learn and avoid this mistake people are making all the time. Normally, the biggest cost for an investor is debt payments, which leads us to step number 4, arrange financing. During the contract to close phase, we need to arrange financing and see what our loan cost is going to be. This will depend on the terms the lenders are willing to give us on this particular property. The monthly cost of the loan will be dependent on the amortization schedule, interest rate, and amount we borrow. It should be your goal to have all your physical and financial due diligence done prior to the end of the due diligence period. The financing contingency will allow more time to arrange your loan without risking your earnest money. Your job is to make sure the terms you get on a loan from the bank fit into your pro forma and allow you to hit your goals. There are 2 ways to feel confident in your progress on getting a loan. The first is when you get a term sheet from a banker. This is where they tell you what kind of loan they'll give you and the details of the loan, like interest rate, loan to value, and amortization schedule. But you have to treat this like an LOI that you're giving the property seller. It is the bank's intention, but it is not their promise. The other way is a loan commitment. This is the highest guarantee you can get from a banker that they're going to give you the loan on your property. As long as you can get a term sheet and then a loan commitment prior to the end of the financing contingency, your earnest money is protected. If you can't get the loan that will allow you to hit your goals before your financing contingency expires, you can cancel the contract because of that and get your earnest money back. To avoid having to cancel your contract because of bankers, you need to start building a relationship with lenders and always stay in touch with them to stay up to date on what kind of loan terms you can get. As loan terms change through time, you need to keep current on what financing terms are available so you can properly underwrite deals. The final piece of getting a loan is making sure that your property appraises for an amount equal to or greater than how much you're buying the property for. If you're buying a property for $100,000 and the lender tells you they'll finance 80% of the deal, that means they'll give you $80,000, 80% of $100,000. But if your appraisal comes back at $90,000 on the deal, then the lender is only going to give you 80% of the appraised amount. That means your loan will be 80% of $90,000 instead of 80% of $100,000, and 80% of $90,000 is $72,000. Now, in your pro forma, you're likely to assume that you're buying a property for an amount less than it would appraise for. Because of this assumption, you thought the bank would give you the full $80,000 loan to help you purchase it. If the appraisal comes back lower, this means your loan will be smaller and will alter your underwriting because of two reasons. Number one, you now have to make a larger down payment. You'll have to cover the $8,000 difference that the bank is not giving you from the $80,000 to the $72,000 loan, and that's going to change your financial returns because you put more of a down payment in. The second reason is your debt payments are going to be lower. Your monthly mortgage payments are going to be lower because you borrowed less, and that's going to change the financial returns. While $8,000 may not sound like a huge difference, it can really change the performance of a deal. You're originally planning to put $20,000 in the property, and now you have to put $28,000 into the property. That's a 40% increase in your down payment. Appraisals can take a few days or a few weeks from the time you order them, so try and order your appraisal as soon as you can. For me, that's normally after I have a good grasp on the physical condition of the property and the accuracy of the pro forma I have in place. You don't want to order an appraisal too soon because you have to pay for it whether you buy the property or not. There's no point in paying for an appraisal if you're going to cancel the contract for some physical or financial reason in your due diligence period. But you also don't want to wait until the last possible second to get your appraisal in. If the appraisal value comes back lower than you expect it to, you'll be required to put more equity in. Putting more equity in can cause the deal to not hit your financial goals. That's why you should put priority on getting a good grasp on the due diligence aspects as quickly as you can before and after the contract binds. It's really a balancing act. The balancing is much easier the sooner you can complete the physical and financial due diligence. One of the last steps needed before closing a deal is step number 5, title work. The title to a property grants someone the rights to use the property. We can't just say having the property title means you own the property. There are different levels of rights. The most common type of ownership is fee simple, and that means you have all rights associated with a property. To find out about the title of a property when you want to buy it, you'll have an attorney or a title company do a title search where they tell you about the issues and potential concerns for this property. If there are no issues or concerns, they'll tell you the title is clear. If you're buying a property and all rights that come along with it, you still need to have an attorney double check that there are no other problems on the property. Sometimes the prior owners have agreed to let other owners of neighboring properties use a piece of your land for a specific reason. Maybe the only way they could get to their land is by going through yours. In this case, the prior owner may have granted them what's called an easement, which allows them to use your property. This easement will show up on your title report. There are many potential title problems that come along with the property, but luckily, that's not your role to know how to read a title report and how to understand how that impacts you owning the property. It is your responsibility to talk with an attorney or a title company that did the search and understand what the report is saying and what implications any title problems may have on your investment. If they tell you something that you don't understand, never feel bad for asking them, what is that? Can you explain to me how that impacts my ownership of this property? How do we solve this? And what are the implications if we can't solve this? After you get done with title work, you can move on to step number 6, which is close the deal. This is a very exciting time, especially if this is your first closing. Before you start to celebrate, you have a few more tasks to complete. First thing you're going to need to do is request a settlement statement. Depending on where you're located, this may be called something else. Some may call it a HUD, and others may call it a closing statement. They're all the same thing. The purpose of this document is to show you where money is coming from and where it's going to. These can be confusing to read if you've never read them before. Once you see one and understand how they work, you'll be able to read them forever and easily. To make this process simple, I made a free video for you showing how to read a settlement statement from one of my prior deals. Go check it out. Go to haydencrabtree.com/resources, and you can watch that video and learn how to read a settlement statement. As referenced in that video, you may have to request some changes to be made. Once you have completed the settlement statement, it's time to close the deal. You need to sync with your lender, closing agent, and property seller to make sure everyone's aware of when and where the documents are going to be signed and when the wires with the money will be sent. After that, it's go time. Cash flow is just around the corner. So we just covered many important topics about deals. You've learned what off-market deals are, the 2 requirements for any off-market deal, a 4-part process to find off-market deals, and which markets you should be buying in. Then you learn the different types of deals and different investment strategies. Then you got a complete overview of the step-by-step process to closing deals. From the pre-contract phase where the steps were, number 1, know your goal. Number 2, find a deal. Number 3, underwrite the deal. Number 4, make an offer. Then you move over to the contract to close phase where you have to 1, bind the contract. 2, conduct physical due diligence. 3, conduct financial due diligence. 4, arrange financing. 5, do your title work. And 6, close the deal. Man, what a ride. Now we have just covered the deal section. Let's move on to the management section. Section 2, management. Section 1 covered everything you need to know about the deal. In Section 2, we're going to cover what kind of management you need to grow your real estate portfolio. We'll also talk about what you, as the captain of the ship, need to do yourself and what you need to delegate to your crew. Section 2.1, your dream job isn't being a landlord. When I first started working for my mentor, I was filled with excitement from the time I woke up until the time I went to sleep. It was really happening. I was learning to acquire assets that would pay me each and every month for the rest of my life. Even more exciting than that, I was working towards financial freedom. I was no longer going to have to trade my time for money. It was such an exciting time until I learned firsthand about the trap that so many real estate investors fall into. Everyone knows that cash flow properties have to be taken care of. Rents have to be collected from tenants, expenses have to be paid monthly. When something at the property stops working, maintenance has to be done. As things break or need to be replaced, you have to do small and large repairs. Grass has to be cut, carpets have to be replaced, walls have to get painted. I learned all this firsthand. So, what is the trap that so many real estate investors fall into? The trap of self-managing your own properties. Here's what I learned very quickly from my time working for free. You do have to manage your properties, but you don't have to be a property manager. Let's say that again one more time. You do have to manage your properties, but you don't have to be a property manager. Let me explain what I mean. The management key of this puzzle is actually composed of 2 different kinds of management. First, we have property management. All the normal tasks that we just talked about fall under the property management category. The truth that I learned early in my real estate career is that if you own a large portfolio, but you're doing all the property management yourself, you have not achieved financial freedom. You are still working for money and you still have a job. I urge you not to fall into the trap of managing your own properties. You have way more important tasks to do. The other kind of management that I learned about and that I still do myself is investment management, and this is also called asset management. So the 2 kinds of management are property management and investment management. So what's the difference between the 2? Property management is all about operations. Move customers in, take customer money, fix any problems that customer has, move customer out when they're done doing business with us. It's the same as any other business. But investment management is about financial performance, making sure your investments are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Are you hitting your financial goals? Is your property cash flowing as much as it should be? What properties are overperforming and which properties are underperforming? What can we do to take the properties that are underperforming and make them come back up to the financial performance that we need in our portfolio? And if we can't get the performance back up, do we need to sell this property and move on to another investment? We'll have a more in-depth discussion about asset management in section 2.2, but let's finish up our talk on property management first. I know so many new investors that are tempted to manage your first property yourself, but it's really not a good idea. The amount of money you'll save yourself on property management is not worth the amount of time you'll cost yourself. In my real estate career, I can say with confidence I've made more money per hour working to find and analyze new deals than any other tasks, bar none. Sure, you'll be able to keep 6 or 8% of the income your property generates if you do all the work yourself, but that's an overall loss on your potential to generate more income. Let's say you buy a property that generates $50,000 a year in rental income. If you pay a property manager 8%, that'll be $4,000 a year you pay to them. $4,000 a year is a nice boost, but what's the opportunity cost of that $4,000? For comparison, we'll assume that you're going to spend 10 hours a month on that property. That's 120 hours a year, and the cost of the property management then comes out to $33 an hour. So the question is, can we make more money than $33 an hour trying to find new properties to buy? Instead of putting those 120 hours a year towards managing your property, if you did 120 hours of deal hunting, could you find one property to invest in that you can profit more than $4,000 off of? The answer is absolutely you can. A key mindset shift you have to learn in the beginning is this: don't work in your portfolio, work on your portfolio. Spend your time finding new properties and managing your investments. Don't spend your valuable time managing properties. That's as simple as it gets. There's no more to talk about. Don't do property management yourself, but do your investment management yourself. Now let's move on and let's discuss managing your assets. Section 2.2, manage your assets like a pro. Now that you're convinced you don't need to be your own property manager, we need to do a deep dive into the kind of management that you need to do for life, yourself. Property management is a job, a series of tasks that must be done in order to make your tenants happy, keep your property nice, and collect your money. Asset management, on the other hand, is like being a pilot. A pilot's best friends is the gauges that show the status of all the important parts of the plane. The work itself, being a pilot, is not very hard, but what you need to know is which gauges to check to make sure you're safe and that you're going to reach your destination in the plane. Your goal is a smooth flight, but when things get a little bumpy, you need to know when and how to step in and make sure you're safe. Together, all the little gauges make a dashboard that the pilot can quickly glance at and know the status of all the different systems on the plane. Without a dashboard, the pilot couldn't operate the plane with confidence. But when all is in check and the dashboard is clear of any problems, the pilot can put the plane on autopilot. Then they can sit back, relax, while all the work is done for them, knowing they're on the right track and free of any problems. By the end of this, I want you to walk away knowing what gauges you need to monitor in your real estate portfolio. We'll go over several different gauges and compile a portfolio dashboard for you. This way, you can put your portfolio on autopilot, sit back, and enjoy the ride, growing your cash flow and wealth through real estate investing. Sound good? Great. Let's go over a few important definitions first to make sure we're on the same page. So here's some asset management definitions. Value. This is how much your property is worth. Debt balance. This is how much money you owe the bank. Equity. This is the property value minus our debt balance. Sales proceeds. How much money you would walk away with if you were to sell the property. This is value minus our debt balance minus our other selling fees like a broker or an agent expense. Potential gross income. This is PGI. How much income the property would generate if all units were full and everybody paid market rate rents. Effective gross income. This is EGI. How much money you actually collect, the money you put in your bank account. Market rate rents. The fair rate your property should collect in the market. If you have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home and other units like yours are renting for $1,000 a month, the market rate rent would be $1,000 a month. Concessions. The money you don't make because you're trying to get new customers to rent from you. These don't have an actual cost, but they're a missed opportunity to create income. An example would be first month free, or rent for 12 months and get your 13th month free. Physical occupancy. How full your property is. If you have 10 units and 9 are rented out, then your physical occupancy is 90%. Economic occupancy. how much money you actually collect as a percentage of how much you should have collected. This is the effective gross income divided by the potential gross income. If you could have collected $100,000, but you only collected $75,000, then your economic occupancy is 75%. Operating expenses, the bills you incur by owning the property. These are property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, utility bills, property management fees, software costs, and others. Net operating income, also known as NOI. This is the effective gross income minus our operating expenses. This would be the amount of money we keep if we didn't have a loan and debt service to the bank. Debt service. This is also called mortgage payments. It's the amount we pay to any lender for the loans we owe them every single month. Cash flow. This is our NOI minus our debt service. This is the money we stick in our pocket. Cash in the deal. This is how much of our own money we had to invest in order to buy the property. This is also called your down payment. Cash on cash, or also known as COC. How much cash flow the property produces divided by your cash in the deal. If your cash in the deal, your down payment was $10,000 and the property produces $3,000 of cash flow in a year, your cash on cash is 30%, $3,000 divided by $10,000. Return on equity. How much cash flow the property produces divided by your equity in the deal. If your equity is $15,000 and the property produces $3,000 a year of cash flow, your return on equity is 20%. Internal rate of return, also called IRR, the compounded average annual rate of return. This essentially tells us how much our money is growing by on average each year. This factors in both cash flow and equity growth. All of these definitions are the little gauges you need to keep your eyes on. Combined together, they create your dashboard. Thankfully, there are two reports we can look at that makes life a lot easier as an investor. The first is the profit and loss statement, otherwise known as the P&L. The P&L is going to show us how much money we collected, the EGI, how much money we spent on operating expenses, and then it'll give us our NOI. That'll be followed by debt service, and at the bottom, how much cash flow we have. The other statement is the balance sheet. This is where we're going to find the value of our assets and the amount of debt we have. Here we will see our equity too, which is asset value minus our debt balance. Together, the P&L and the balance sheet create a pro forma for us. As discussed before, when we're analyzing new properties to purchase, we use a pro forma to analyze the property. After we own a property, we turn the results that actually happened into financial reports, and we continue to use a pro forma to forecast our future results and returns. The core of proper asset management is keeping up with your financial reports and doing your best to forecast the results that your properties will bring in the future. Once we understand what kind of returns we're already receiving from a property and what returns we may expect to get in the future, we can start managing our assets like a pro. The goal of asset management is to earn as high of a return as possible with the capital that is invested. If we check our dashboard and realize that a property is not living up to the performance that we originally predicted, it's our job as asset managers to figure out why that is and if we can change it. Perhaps the property manager we've hired is not doing as good as they're supposed to. In that case, we need to fire them and hire a new one. Maybe our property is not as nice as we thought it was when we were first buying it, and we need to go into our forecast and look at the returns if we were to lower our rents down to a lower number. We could see if the returns that would be produced would be good enough for us, or if we needed to consider putting more money into the property, making it nicer, and therefore charging higher rents. Or maybe you purchased a property in a bad market before you read this book. And the section on market selection. In that case, you may realize that you need to sell that property and move your capital to a property in a different market with a better long-term outlook. All of these are decisions that you need to make as an asset manager, but first you have to be able to detect a problem before we can solve it. So balance sheets and P&L statements need to be created and reviewed monthly. Your property manager should be taking care of the P&L statement for you, but you'll likely have to create your own balance sheet. Once that's done, we can calculate our cash on cash, return on equity, and our IRR. By glancing at these three metrics, we can get a sense of how our investment is doing. I believe it's important to keep your original pro forma and compare the results you're actually getting compared to what you thought you would get. This will help you learn and get better at analyzing new deals. The more properties you own, the more time intensive this can become. I learned all this from actually doing it. In the beginning, my mentor had many properties, but no investment management systems. This was powerful for me because when I was working for free, I realized this was a major need in his business. I was tasked with creating the systems to properly manage his assets. While I learned a ton putting together those systems, I didn't learn my full lessons until I went through my first partial portfolio sale. Through that process, it was my job to analyze if selling properties was a good decision or not. I had to answer questions like this. If we sell the property now, what will the IRR for our investors be? How much cash will each investor receive? What will each investor's tax bill be? Do we have other properties ready to buy that we can invest this money into? Are we maximizing our returns by selling today? Should we continue to hold these properties and earn a higher return by selling them next year or maybe the year after? Would it make financial sense to put more money into improving our property, therefore raising the income, and then selling it? These are all great questions to be asking yourself, and I would encourage you to ask yourself these questions regularly. But I knew that it could be hard to get all these answers. In fact, I spent the majority of 3 months building spreadsheets and answering these questions for my investors. Why is this so important? These are things that we can control to give ourselves a better return and more profits. Let's run through a couple quick numbers. If you invested $100,000 at 10% return for 10 years, you would end up with $259,374. I'll say that again. If you invested $100,000 at a 10% return for 10 years, you would have $259,374. But if you could give yourself an extra 1% and increase your average annual return to 11%, up from 10% to 11%, over 10 years, you would now have $283,942. That extra 1% you earned is $24,568. That's a lot of money. Move that 11% up, 1 more percent to 12% over 2 years, and you're looking at a total of $310,585. That's an extra $51,211. These differences get larger the more that time goes on. An 11% return on $100,000 over 20 years is $806,000. At a 12% return on the same amount over 20 years is $964,000. At 10 years, there is a $26,000 difference between 11% and 12%. At 20 years, the difference grows to $158,000. And that's the power of asset management. Tweaking your performance by 1 or 2% can make you hundreds of thousands of extra dollars. The longer you practice investment management, the more it pays off. So with all this in mind, I sat down and tried to wrangle all the financial data I needed to make these decisions. It was a nightmare. There wasn't a single day for 3 months that I didn't spend my time creating or editing an Excel spreadsheet, building complex formulas from scratch with the data that I had, and then working to get the data that I didn't have, requesting information from our banks, going back to the spreadsheets and plugging the information in, requesting information from my accountant, going back to the spreadsheet and plugging the information in, requesting information from my investors' accountants, then going back to the spreadsheets and plugging the information in, running the same calculation multiple times, once for each offer we received from a different set of buyers, double checking over 100 different calculations inside these spreadsheets to make sure the results I was going to share were accurate. Then I'd go have conference calls with investors to share the results. Then the investors would have questions that would force me to go back to the spreadsheets and spend more time getting those answers. Ultimately, we decided to sell part of the portfolio that made sense. Knowing that I wanted to start rebuilding another portfolio after this sale, I did some research to try and find a platform or a tool that could integrate all of this data into one place from the start and really launch my next portfolio the right way. I couldn't find anything. And so fed up, I decided to build my own solution from scratch. As I was creating this tool, I realized I could add any feature that I wanted, and one of the features I'd been missing most as an investor was an integrated deal analysis tool on the same platform as my investment management. That way I could see the performance of my portfolio and the new deals that I wanted to buy all in one central hub. I can easily compare the financial performance of new deals I'm looking at buying with the actual results of the property I already own, which directly helps me make better asset management decisions. To make all this possible, I create a program to handle all this not only for me, but for you too. It's called My Property Stats, and it does exactly what we're talking about. It helps you keep track of your portfolio's performance, giving you real-time data about the performance of your portfolio as a whole, and also data on each individual property. Here's a sample of the data you can get. Your cash on cash from the last year, your return on your equity of your entire portfolio, live IRR on each of the properties you own. The system will let you choose if you want to view your entire portfolio, an individual property, or it'll let you choose a custom segment of your portfolio to get data on. So let's say you have 6 rental houses and 4 apartment buildings in 3 different states. Let's call them State X, State Y, and State Z. You can tell the system you want to see the data on only your rental houses in State X. Maybe you want to see the data on all of your apartment buildings only. You could tell the system that you want to see the data from both rental houses and apartments in State Z. It really allows you to slice and dice your entire portfolio and view your performance however you want. Keeping track of your historical performance is great, but it's also critical for you to understand what your portfolio will look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years, and even beyond. My Property Stats will do all of that by forecasting your performance for you so that you can understand what your values, debts, equity, revenue, expenses, and cash flows will be at any time in the future. So say you're 35 years old right now and you want to see what your portfolio will look like when you're 50. My Property Stats will tell you that. Want to know how much cash flow your portfolio will have in 3 years? My Property Stats will predict it for you and let you choose how you want to calculate your projections. You can choose it from a flat inflation rate, the original projections you set when purchasing the property, or you can create a custom projection for your property, or you can let the system analyze your property's historical performance and project the future based on past performances and trends. In addition, you can analyze new deals you want to buy right on the same platform and compare those new properties with the projects you already own. Inside the deal analysis section, there's a pipeline that helps you keep track of properties you're analyzing, properties you've made offers on, and properties you have under contract. Once you have it under contract, you can store all of your due diligence documents right there in the cloud, making it even easier to find those important files, not only in your due diligence, but also after you own the property, it stores all the documents for you forever. In sales reps have what we call is a customer relationship management or a CRM system. This helps them create profiles for people who may want to buy from them, along with any contact info and notes about the property. We've done the same thing inside My Property Stats, where you can keep up with your deals, their performance, and all the important documents and critical dates. Once you close on that property, you can move the property from a prospective investment to part of your portfolio at the click of a button. This means all the important documents and projections you've been working hard on are stored with little effort in an organized fashion. Anytime you need to retrieve a document in the future or check on your original projections, you can do it in 1/10 the time it normally takes. If you already own one property, I want to invite you to check out the platform we built with everyday real estate investors in mind. You can do this work on your own for now, but once you acquire more properties, this will start to become a lot of work and require a lot of time. Do you already have more than one property? You have to go check out the platform and start making informed asset management decisions. Let My Property Stats help you squeeze out an extra 1% over the next 20 years, making you hundreds of thousands of extra dollars. Go to mypropertystats.com now to learn about all the cool features we built in to save you time and make your life easier while growing your real estate portfolio. I write these books to help people become wealthy through real estate, but that's one-time help. I want to help investors make better decisions, save time, and grow their wealth every day, forever. The other programs out there like this are for Wall Street companies with hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of real estate. I've looked into those programs, and the cheapest price I've seen is $18,000 for the year. The price goes up from there for each feature you want. It's crazy. I was talking with another self-storage owner about a month ago, and he spends over $100,000 a year on a software just like this. At My Property Stats, we aren't for Wall Street. We're created for Main Street real estate investors. That's me and that's you. People who don't have pension funds giving them $100 million a year to invest. We must be as smart as possible with our money. That's why my system has such a low cost. I want you to be able to keep your money and make smarter decisions. If it wasn't going to help you make more money than it costs, there'd be absolutely no purpose. So let's move on and let's talk about other asset management tasks you need to be doing once you start and grow your portfolio. Section 2.3, protect your assets like a pro. The rich own nothing. That's a powerful quote by Robert Kiyosaki. But at first glance, it's a strange quote that doesn't make much sense. How can someone be rich if they don't own anything? Aren't rich people the people who own a lot of stuff? Before Robert Kiyosaki, John D. Rockefeller had said something similar. He said, own nothing but control everything. The point these two are trying to make, and that the wealthiest people know and understand, is that it is not smart to own anything in your personal name. The wealthiest people know this, but the average person does not. Instead of owning things in your personal name, everything that you own should be owned by a company instead of you. You can own that company that owns the stuff, but you should not directly own the stuff. As a side note, nothing from this chapter should be taken as legal advice. I'm not a legal professional. Seek professional legal guidance on your own. Let me show you some visuals. If you're listening to this, you should really go check out the actual book. This is section 2.3. Let's say there's two things here in this picture. We have you, a person, and an investment property. Here in the first image, we have you and an investment property that you want to buy. If you go through all the steps to find, underwrite, and purchase this property, here's what it would look like. You would own the property. You would own the property in your personal name. We talked earlier about the title of a property. If you bought the property in your name, when somebody looks up who owns the property, they would find your personal name on the title. In exchange for owning the property, you're going to be entitled to the cash flows and any profits that come out of the property from refinancing or selling the property. This is pretty simple, right? Nothing new here. You own a property, you get cash flow, you get profits. But in addition to the money, do you know what else you're entitled to as the owner of the property? That's right. You're also responsible for the liabilities of the property. Traditionally, I would define a liability as something that takes money out of your pocket, but in this situation, it has a different meaning. In this example, a liability is something bad that you are responsible for. The biggest potential liability is a lawsuit. Let's say someone was working on your property and they fell off of their ladder. When they fell off, they broke their leg. Because they broke their leg, they couldn't work for the next 6 months. They hire a lawyer and come after you because they say your property had uneven floors and that's what caused them to fall off the ladder. Well, guess what? The owner of that property is getting sued. You own that property. Now you have a lawsuit against you for $250,000 in medical bills, and you have to compensate the handyman for the time period in which he could not work and go out and earn income. Now you may be saying to yourself, this isn't even my fault. Good luck getting $250,000 for me. I only invested $30,000 into the property. That's the most I could lose. But sadly, you would be wrong. Because you own that property in your personal name, if somebody sues you, they can come after your personal assets in addition to the value of the property. So if you had $50,000 of cash in your personal bank account, a home you live in with $100,000 of equity in it, and 2 vehicles that were both worth $50,000, then the person suing you could come after all of those things. And this is why proper asset protection is so important. You can work hard to build your wealth, and if it's not properly protected, it can vanish in an instant. Again, I'm no lawyer, and this should not be taken as legal advice. You should be having an asset protection lawyer help you with all of this. So what does proper asset protection look like, and how do you do it? How do you protect yourself from this situation? The first step is to create a company. After that, you're going to want the company to buy the investment property. Let's call our company Cashflow LLC. Here's what it would look like. You would own Cashflow LLC, and Cashflow LLC would own the investment property. You're still in the picture, and the same investment property is still in the picture, but now we have an extra element. We have Cashflow LLC in the middle of you and the property. You have ownership of Cashflow LLC, and Cashflow LLC has ownership of the property. Does this mean that you have ownership of the property? No, you personally do not own that investment property. If we were to look up the title of the property, we would find Cashflow LLC on the title as the owner. We would not find your name anywhere on the title. But what about the money? So because Cashflow LLC has ownership of the investment property, the cash flows and the profits also have to be paid back to Cashflow LLC, not to you. And of course, we would expect the owner to get the cash flow and the profits. But how does that help you personally? It's easy. What you do is called an owner distribution from Cashflow LLC to yourself. You take the money from the company and distribute it out to the owners of the company. In this case, you're the sole owner of the company, and therefore you are entitled to all the distributions. the company distributions can be exactly the same amount that the company receives. So you won't make any less money by owning the investment property through the company. But what about the liabilities? What about somebody coming after you or suing you? Here's what would happen. The property still has the potential to have lawsuits and other liabilities, but the liabilities only apply to the owner of the property. They do not apply to the person who owns the company. So if you own Cashflow LLC and the same exact situation happens as earlier, where someone gets hurt at the property and tries to sue you, what happens? They are only able to come after the assets that Cashflow LLC owns. They cannot come after your personal assets. No coming after your personal house, your cash, or your cars. They can still get money from the company, but they can't get money from you. And this is a really important distinction. It's also really important to note something called the corporate veil. You want to make sure that you abide by the rules so that you cannot have your corporate veil pierced. This is where someone who sues the company can come after the owner of the company's assets. I'm no lawyer, but if you want to Google it and you can read up on how to make sure you follow the rules and follow through on keeping your personal assets separate from the assets of the company. Does all this make sense? To summarize, don't own properties in your personal name. Own a property in a company and protect your assets. This is a form of insurance for your personal wealth. It's also never good to get sued, so do everything you can to avoid that situation, even if you do have proper asset protection in place. Are we clear on all that? Great. Now I can predict exactly what your next question will be. Should I have one LLC for all my properties, or should I have an LLC for each property? Here, let's look at a situation where you have 3 investment properties and only one company. So in the image here, we have Cashflow LLC, and we have ownership of 3 different properties, and you are the sole owner of Cashflow LLC. And you would be correct to think that your personal assets are protected from anything that happens at any of the 3 properties. So is this solid asset protection? In my book, it's not. Why? Let's go back to the scenario where someone breaks their leg and wants $250,000 from you. If that happened at property number 1, the person is going to sue the company. And guess what? The company owns 3 properties. That means the equity in property 2 and property 3 are also vulnerable to this lawsuit. So instead, here's what it should look like. You should have Cashflow 1 LLC own property 1. You should create a new company that's called Cashflow 2 LLC, and that should solely own property number 2. And then you should create a third company called Cashflow 3 LLC, and that should own property 3. That's all it should own. And so don't get overwhelmed by this. All that's going on here is each property has its own company. When the property makes money, the money gets passed along to you as its owner, but the liability does not. Also, because each property is separate from the other 2, you don't have to worry about something happening at property number 1 and it affecting your wealth that's stored in property 2 or property 3. This is true only if you operate correctly and do not pierce the corporate veil. Asset protection is a major part of asset management. Got it? Awesome. Now you know how to protect your ass. Section 2.4, Operating Capital. Outsourcing property management? Check. Keeping track of your property's performance? Check. Protecting your assets? Check. Operating capital funded? What? What is operating capital? Operating capital is the money you need to have in your bank account to pay for expenses that the property is going to incur while you wait on next month's rent to come in. Let's see what this looks like on a normal month for a property that has $2,000 a month of rental income, a $900 monthly mortgage payment, and $400 of other expenses. Let's say before we start the month we have $0 in that property's bank account. So if we start the month with 0 in our account, then we get $2,000 of income on the first, our bank account goes up to $2,000. That's simple enough. Now let's see what happens when we pay our mortgage, which is due on the 5th of the month. Our mortgage is $900. Now our bank account is down to $1,100. We're in a great spot to pay the rest of our $400 of expenses and be left over with cash flow at the end of the month. Let's take a look at the calendar if we pay the rest of our expenses through the end of the month. On the 13th, we pay $150 of taxes, which brings our bank balance down to $950. On the 14th, we pay $150 of insurance, which brings our bank balance down to $800. And on the 27th of the month, we pay $100 of utilities, which brings our bank balance down to $700. We end the month with $700 left in the account. This $700 is cash flow. Put this money in your pocket, right? Well, not so fast. While you did have $700 of cash flow, let's take a look at the same month, but let's see what the bank account would look like if the property didn't have a tenant in it. So now we're going to look at the monthly income if we did not have a tenant. We start the month with $0 in our account. On the 1st, there's no tenant in there, so we don't receive any income. On the 5th of the month, we still have to pay our $900 a month mortgage, which brings our bank balance to negative $900. It's not a great start. You're going to have to write a check to the bank out of your personal account in order to cover the mortgage. You're also going to have to cover the rest of the bills through the month. This is actually going to put you $1,300 out of pocket for the month. Not only did you not have any cash flow, but you had to pay to own the property. This has become a liability. And don't be so arrogant to think to yourself, this will never happen to me. My property always stay full. They won't. Or maybe the property stays full, but you find yourself needing to make a repair that costs $1,000. Even if you have a tenant in your property and they're paying rent, you'll still have to come out of pocket to pay for the repair. So what's the solution to this? Operating capital. Operating capital is the money that sits in your bank account to be prepared for whatever may happen. Your tenant could move out, your tenant may lose their job and not pay you, you could have a repair bill that you need to pay. There are a number of different things that can happen that are going to cause you to need some cash for the property. So what I do, and what I advise you do as well, is have some money that sits in your account and is ready to go whenever. My rule is that I have 2 months of operating expenses and 2 months of mortgage payments in my accounts at all time, ready for whatever may happen. So in the case of this property, I would have $2,600 of operating capital. That's $1,300 a month between the mortgage payment and the bills, and I multiply that by 2 to get $2,600. Now let's review the example where I have no tenant in the property, but let's say this time I have operating capital in the bank account. So we start the month with $2,600 in our account. On the 1st of the month, we don't get any rental income. That still leaves our bank account balance at $2,600. When the mortgage comes due on the 5th of the month, we still have to pay $900, and that drops our bank balance from $2,600 down to $1,700. When we pay our taxes and insurance on the 13th and 14th of the month, our bank balance goes down to $1,400. At the end of the month, we pay $100 of utilities, bringing our bank balance down to $1,300. This shows us that we don't have to come out of pocket for any money on this property. Are we happy about this result? Absolutely not. We need to get this property full and cash flowing as soon as possible. But it's much better when a property can cover its shortfalls on its own rather than needing to dip into your personal bank account. Now that the property's bank balance is down to $1,300, we need to let it replenish back to its standard level of $2,600 before we do any owner distributions. Once we've reached the $2,600, we can start sending owner distributions for everything over the $2,600. And this is why I prefer to invest in multi-tenant commercial properties. You're certainly going to have a tenant who doesn't pay or moves out at some point. When you have multiple tenants at one property, you reduce your risk of having zero income in a single month. So the question becomes, when do we need to put operating capital into a bank account for our property? For me, I do it on day one, and I analyze my properties and calculate how much operating capital it needs while I'm underwriting that deal. We talked about this in the deal analysis masterclass. Before I make an offer on the property, I know how much operating capital will be required. Again, for me, that's 2 months of operating expenses and 2 months of debt service. The reason I do it this way is that money sitting in the bank account will always be there until I sell the property. It should be considered part of that investment. I wouldn't have to lock that money away in an operating capital bank account if I didn't purchase the property. So make sure when you're analyzing the returns on a property, you're comparing apples to apples, and the money in the account is considered part of your down payment or cash in the deal. So let's summarize asset management real quick. The lessons we've talked about here are not complicated, nor are they hard to execute. The proper asset management is something that's very easy to overlook because it's a non-urgent issue. Urgent issues are things that come up in your life every single day that need your attention immediately. There's a great book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where the author, Stephen Covey, outlines the following image called the time management matrix. Since you're listening to this book, go look up the time management matrix on Google and take a look at it if you haven't read this book. The time management matrix is broken down into 4 quadrants. The first is that which is urgent and important. Here in quadrant 1, things are both urgent and important. We're dealing with crises, resolving pressing problems, and finishing deadline-driven projects. Living in quadrant 1 leads to stress and burnout. Next, we have quadrant 2. These are tasks that are important but not urgent. In this quadrant, we're working on problem prevention, relationship building, finding new opportunities, and planning for the future. Living in quadrant 2 leads to vision, balance, discipline, control, and very few crises. On the bottom, we get into quadrant 3, where we're dealing with urgent issues that have little importance. In quadrant 3, we're dealing with interruptions that have very little long-term impact. People in quadrant 3 have very short-term focus, feel out of control in their life, and see goals and plans as worthless. Finally, we have quadrant 4, where the tasks are a waste of time and also known as busy work. These are non-important and non-urgent. People who spend time in quadrant 4 are irresponsible, fired from their jobs, and generally depend on others for their basic needs in their lives. So why am I telling you all this? Generally, we believe our time needs to be spent handling the urgent issues, but what Stephen Covey teaches us in this time management matrix is the most successful people have a discipline of living in quadrant 2. They spend time making the important and non-urgent things in their life a priority. Asset management is exactly that. It's not urgent. It's the furthest thing in the world from urgent, but it's extremely important to your long-term wealth. There are 100 other urgent places you could spend your time, and asset management is at the bottom of that list. Managing your assets properly has a huge compounding effect on your wealth. Managing your assets properly for 1 month will yield no noticeable results. The work you do will not lead to any difference in your life. Managing your assets properly for 1 year will start to yield noticeable results, but nothing life-changing. But fast forward 10 years and you will notice a massive difference in your own personal wealth if you've managed your assets properly. And that's what real estate investing is all about, building a better future for yourself and your family. If all you cared about was your personal happiness today, you wouldn't be listening to this book. You wouldn't consider investing time, energy, and money into real estate investing. You would take all of your resources and use them to make yourself happy now. But that's not you. You exercise delayed gratification. You're probably a quadrant 1, quadrant 2, and quadrant 3 person with the most time spent in quadrant 1. I know I certainly was before I read the book. And I can say that with confidence, otherwise you wouldn't be reading this sentence right now. So if we know that you're interested in a better tomorrow, why not make it the best possible version you can? You should. Make investment management a priority in your real estate portfolio and watch your wealth compound. Section 3, Capital. Section 1 covered the deal. In Section 2, we covered what kind of management you need to grow your real estate portfolio. Here in Section 3, we're going to go over everything you need to know about the financing piece of the real estate puzzle. When I first got started, I had nothing. No knowledge, no connections, and the biggest challenge I thought I'd have was no money. My biggest limiting belief was that I needed a lot of cash in order to make progress as an investor. I wanted to do million-dollar deals, and I thought that meant I needed a war chest full of cash. In my mind, I needed to be Daddy Warbucks before I could buy property. This was such a limiting belief in my mind that after a few months of working for free, I considered switching paths and finding other work that could earn me a high income. I believed for some time that I needed to get a high-paying job, live frugally, and save up some money. After I worked on that strategy for some time, I would revisit the world of real estate investing. I didn't do that. And I'm sure glad that I shut off that voice in my head that told me, you can't do that, and I kept pushing. We're about to go over what I learned about the capital key and how that allowed me to start buying multi-million-dollar properties with no money. So buckle in and let's do this. Section 3.1, Capital Stack plus Sources and Uses. In the coming sections, we're going to discuss specific strategies and examples you can use to get deals done, no matter how much or little money you have. But before we do that, we need to break down some fundamental concepts so that you can grasp the strategies. I learn and teach better through visuals and examples, so we'll be having some of those resources to help us through the fundamentals. If you're listening to this audiobook, I'm going to do my best to try and help you understand what these visuals are, but it would be really great if you'd go look at the book to see these visuals. Let's start off with a basic example. We're buying a $100,000 rental property represented by this image below. This is just a property. It's from $0 to $100,000 and a full bar. There are many different ways we could purchase this property. For example, the standard way to purchase an investment property would be at 75% leverage. That means the bank is going to lend us 75% of the money to buy the property, and we're going to provide the other 25%. Here's what it would look like. Out of the $100,000 on the bottom, we have a gray shaded piece. That's our debt. It goes from $0 to $75,000. On top of that, we have our equity portion, which is a little bit lighter, and that is from $75,000 to $100,000. In the example, the darker shaded part on the bottom is the debt piece. This goes up to $75,000. The lighter piece on the top is the down payment of $25,000. Combined, the two add up to the total price of $100,000 you need to pay to purchase the property. We've just created a basic version of a capital stack. This is the first fundamental piece for you to understand. The capital stack is made up of two basic components: debt and equity. Essentially, the capital stack tells us where the money to pay for this purchase is coming from. It's as easy as that. How much of this $100,000 purchase is going to be paid for with debt, and how much of it will be paid for with equity? That's your capital stack. Now let's throw in some more numbers. Let's say that the closing cost on the property is going to be $5,000. In addition to that, you're going to need to do some repairs to the property that are going to cost $20,000. So what does that look like? Now we have a total project cost of $125,000. That's broken down to the same debt amount of $75,000 and an increased down payment of $50,000. To understand our leverage amount, we take the loan amount of $75,000 and divide it by the total cost of $125,000. That gives us 60%. But wait a second, I thought we could get a loan of 75%. You can. Some lenders will give you a larger loan to pay for the closing costs and upgrades to the property. Other lenders will not, so you need to have a conversation with your lender and ask if they will finance these other costs for you. What would the capital stack look like if they did finance all the other costs at 75%? We have a total amount of $125,000 and we multiply it by 75% to get $93,750. That means our down payment is $125,000 total cost minus the loan amount of $93,750, which gives us $31,250. By asking our lender to finance the closing costs and repairs, we got to invest $18,750 less into the property and still get the project done. Here's an important lesson, especially if you're trying to get deals done with little or no money. The lesson is your ability to get deals done is directly tied to your ability to solve the pieces of the capital stack. Negotiating with the bank to give you a larger loan allows you to put less money in the deal. But some lenders may refuse to give you the extra loan. In that case, you have to come up with other ways to solve the pieces of the capital stack. Maybe we switch to another lender and they tell us about a special program we qualify for. This loan program will cover all closing costs and property upgrades. It's a 97% LTV loan. This is what the property stack would look like. The debt is huge. In the mind of a good real estate investor, the debt being huge is not a bad thing. 97% of this project is being paid for by debt, and only 3% is being paid for by you with cash. In these examples, we still have the exact same property. What we're doing is looking at different ways to buy the property. So let's take a look at a simple pro forma. In the case of the 97% LTV loan, we have income of $18,000 on the property, expenses of $7,200, and an NOI of $10,800. Regardless of how we finance the property, which bank we use, how much money we put in the property, the income, expenses, and the NOI stays the same. It will not change. But as we move the pieces of the capital stack around, we will impact everything that happens below the NOI. So let's see what happens below the NOI on a 97% LTV example. Let's say the loan terms are 30-year amortization, 5% interest rate, and we borrow $121,250. At these loan terms, our payments would be $7,810 a year. If we subtract our debt service from our NOI, we get a cash flow of $2,990 a year. Remember, our down payment was 3% or $3,750. That gives us a cash-on-cash return of 79.7%, which is incredibly high. But the main reason that percentage is so high is because we didn't put a lot of money into the deal. Now let's take a look at how the numbers would work if we went back to the example where we had a 75% LTV loan, but the bank would not give us a loan to cover the repairs or closing costs of the property. Remember, it's the same exact property. We're just putting different pieces of the capital stack together. The property still has $18,000 of income, $7,200 of operating expenses, and an NOI of $10,800. None of that changed. But let's see what happens below the NOI with this loan on the same terms. 30-year amortization, 5% interest rate, but the loan amount is only $75,000 instead of $121,250. At the lower amount of borrowed money, our payments will be $4,830 a year. This will give us a cash flow of $5,970 a year. But remember, we had to put $50,000 into the project to get the deal done this way. So our cash on cash is 11.9%. The cash on cash is way down, but overall, we're making more dollars. Neither of these is better than the other. The point that you need to understand is the capital stack can affect the economics of a deal. As you try and solve the capital stack, you need to go back to your deal analysis, your pro forma, and make sure that the outcomes that happen as a result of your financing strategy still work for you to hit your goals. Let's look at another scenario. In this scenario, we have the capital stack covered entirely by debt, but on the bottom piece, we have one debt, and on the top piece, we have another debt. So what's going on here? We have one piece of debt on the bottom at 75% of the $125,000. Another piece of debt is above it, filling where our equity would go. In this example, we finance the entire project with debt. No money needs to come out of our pocket. This would be one way to get deals done with no money out of pocket. Now, that debt piece could come from a few different sources. It could come from personal loans, it could come from second mortgages on the property, or it could come from debt investors. There are many different places you can get debt from, so keep your eyes open. Open your mind to the possibilities that are out there. Real estate offers so many opportunities to get creative, you're only limited by your mind. Now, there are a lot of moving parts and numbers, so you need a way to keep up with all of this. Let me introduce you to something we call the sources and uses. Here we have an image of a sources and uses. This sources and uses is for the scenario where we get a loan for $75,000 and have to fund the rest ourselves. What's going on is we're showing where the money is coming from on the left side, this is the sources, and where it's going to be spent on the right side in the uses. So on the sources section, we have a mortgage from the bank of $75,000. We have equity for $50,000. That means our total sources is $125,000. On the right side, we have the uses. We have the purchase of the property for $100,000. We have the property repairs for $20,000. We have closing costs of $5,000. That means our total uses are $125,000. It balances out exactly to our total sources. This is the sources and uses for the scenario where we get a loan for $75,000 and have to fund the rest ourselves. What's going on is this is showing us where the money is coming from on the left side, the sources, and where it's going to be spent on the right side, the uses. The sources section is no different than the capital stack. All we're adding is the uses so we can see where the money will be spent. This will help you adjust your capital stack as the cost of the deal change as you work towards closing. In order to complete a transaction, you have to have your sources and uses balance out. Just like the total sources above are $125,000 and the total uses are $125,000. If you want a template in a spreadsheet format for your own sources and uses, I've built one in Google Sheets that you can have for free as you work towards getting deals done. It'll help you solve the pieces of the capital stack puzzle. You can go get it now for free at haydencrabtree.com/resources. So we just went over a basic capital stack, which shows how much debt and equity we're going to have. Then we briefly went over a sources and uses statement, which shows us where the money is coming from, again the sources, and where it's going to, the uses. Now let's talk about strategies you can use to get deals done. Section 3.2, let the seller be the bank. All right, now we're ready to dive in and learn some specific strategies you can use to make some progress. In the last section, we talked about how the capital stack can be made up of two different elements. The first is debt and the second is equity. Now, most people say to me, but Hayden, I don't have any money for equity and I can't get a loan. I can't be a real estate investor. And when they finish complaining to me, they expect me to look defeated and pat them on the back and say, you're right, you should give up and go get a job. But I don't say that. I call them out, and if you're thinking the same thing right now, I'm calling you out too. The whole I can't do it mentality is a sure way to make sure you never actually do it. You can do it. You just have to quit being lazy. When I say lazy, I don't mean that you don't go to the gym or you don't clean up around your house. I'm talking about mentally lazy. You're shutting your brain off because that's easier than trying to find ways to get a deal done. Now, let's talk about one strategy for getting deals done even if you don't have any cash to put in the deal and if you're not in a financial position to get a loan. This is called owner financing. You may also hear it be called seller financing. It's the same thing. Here's the basic premise. Instead of paying the owner cash for their property, get them to be the bank. Pay them off over time instead of all at once. This is what a traditional purchase with a bank looks like. You have yourself, the property, and the seller of that property. First, we make an agreement to purchase the property, and we give money to the owner in exchange for ownership of the property. But that would be if you're paying all cash. As you learned from Skip the Flip, Secrets the 1% Know About Real Estate Investing, the smartest investors use debt. Here's what the transaction would look like if we had a bank giving us money. First, the bank would give you money, then you give the money to the seller, and the seller gives you property. After the bank lends you the money for the purchase, you're going to give them back money every month. That's called debt service. Those are your mortgage payments. But you already got all this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. This is what we just went over in the capital stack. The money the bank gives you is the debt. The other money you have to put in is your equity. But what if you can't get a bank to lend you money? Simple. Ask the owner of the property to be the bank. How would that work out? Let's go back to the example of the property you're buying for $100,000, and let's ignore closing costs and repairs for a second. Instead of going to, let's call it First Community Bank for a loan, ask the property owner to be the bank. Tell them that instead of going to the bank and paying interest to the bank, how would the owner like to get paid interest on top of the purchase price, effectively increasing the amount of money you're going to pay them for the property. Instead of getting paid one time, how would the owner like to get paid every single month? The loan would work out exactly the same. You set an amortization schedule, an interest rate, and a date when the loan is due. Here's the thing. Banks are not the only ones who can make a loan. Anyone can make a loan. And in fact, the word mortgage does not mean that you have made a loan. A mortgage is the legal paperwork that attaches a loan to a property. So if you can get an owner to give you a loan, they don't actually have to give you money. The loan is just the money that they have in the property they're giving to you. You can let them know that their money is safe and secure because you'll have an attorney create a mortgage and their money will be tied to the value of the property. But banks have their standards. Owner financing does not. You can negotiate anything. You can make the loan 50 years. You can ask for 0% interest. You can ask for interest only for 5 years, then make it amortize over 30 years. You can ask the owner to finance 100% of the purchase. You are only limited to what you can negotiate. So if we go back to the capital stack, what would that look like if we have the owner give us 100% LTV owner finance loan? Well, boom, there you have it. That's one way to buy property with no money. In the image, the capital stack goes all the way from 0 to 100 with owner finance debt, and it requires 0 equity. Now let's go to reality for a second. Is every property owner you talk to going to want to give you owner finance on their property? No. Are the sellers who will owner finance the property to you going to finance 100% of the price to you? Probably not, but in some cases you can get that. I got a no money down deal on a $3 million property. Most sellers are going to want some sort of down payment so they know you have skin in the game. The owners who will finance to you are likely going to be the people who like cash flow but are ready to retire. I found that these are people that do the property management themselves and don't want to work with third-party property managers. By owner financing to you, they get to enjoy a predictable income stream in the form of debt payments rather than rental cash flow. It can be a win-win, and that's the key. Owner financing only works if there's a win-win. You win because you can acquire property on terms that help you hit your goals. The seller wins because they like the idea of getting a check every month with no work at all. If the owner needs to sell because they need a lot of cash for a life expense, then owner financing is not going to solve their problems and they're going to say no to you. But don't take no to your owner financing proposal as a bad thing. It's not going to be an option for every single deal, but it is an option for some deals, and that's what you need to be looking for. While we're on the topic of owner financing, here's another option for you. Let's say on the $100,000 house that the owner needed cash to pay for something in their life. Let's call it their kids' college tuition. They really like cash flow, but they need $50,000 to pay tuition. Now, what we can do is offer them $70,000 of cash and ask them to owner finance the $30,000. We'd get the $70,000 of cash from some other place. Let's say we went and got it from First Community Bank. The $30,000 we would get from the seller would be in second position, or also known as a second mortgage. This means the money is still secured by the value of the property, but would only get paid after the first mortgage gets paid in a situation where the property is foreclosed on. Other than that, all parts of the second mortgage work the exact same. Here's what the capital stack would look like if we got $70,000 from First Community Bank for the first mortgage and $30,000 from the seller for a second mortgage. So in the capital stack, we're still 100% financed by debt. There's no equity involved. But from 0 to 70,000, we have debt from the bank. And in second position, from 70 to 100,000, we have debt from the seller. And there you have it. That's another way to get a deal done with no money out of pocket. This does require you to get a loan though. And here's how the money would flow every single month. Money would come into the property and flow to you. From there, you would pay First Community Bank their monthly mortgage payment. You would also have to pay their seller their monthly mortgage payment. Then you get to keep whatever is left. Instead of paying for the property up front, you pay for it over time. Let's see how the numbers would work out. Using the same loan terms as before, 30-year amortization, 5% interest rate, here are the annual debt payments for First Community Bank and the seller. So good news is we still have cash flow because the debt to First Community Bank was $4,509 a year. Debt to the seller was $1,932 a year. That means your cash flow is $4,359 a year. So what is our cash on cash? Well, to get the calculation, let's take $4,359, which is our annual cash flow, and divide it by the amount of money we have in the deal. Here, the amount of money we have in the deal is $0. So we'll find that our calculators can't give us an answer. That's because we've achieved an infinite return. So are you seeing what I mean by solving the pieces of the capital stack puzzle? This game is all about solving the problem of where the money is coming from. There's so many options to finance a deal. The money doesn't have to come from your personal bank account. Here in the owner finance section, you learn that you can ask the seller to give you a loan instead of going to a bank. You also learn that you can ask the seller to make a smaller second mortgage as a source of capital. Let's keep this train rolling. Let's move on to your next lesson. Section 3.3, controlling is more important than owning. Let me ask you something. Would you rather own something or control it? Which is more important? Earlier in the book, we talked about how you personally don't want to own things, but you want your LLC to own it. That was asset protection. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about controlling something, making all the decisions, getting all the benefits, but not actually being the legal owner. Let me introduce you to a concept called the master lease. The master lease is an agreement between you and the property owner where they allow you to control the property, but they don't sell it to you. This control that they grant you allows you to sublease the property and make improvements to the property, if you make sure to include that in your written agreement with them. The good thing about master leases is that they normally don't require you to put up a lot of money to get started. I've done master leases where I put in no money, so I controlled the property for $0 up front. After that, I made lease payments to the owner every month as agreed upon. This is the same thing I was talking about earlier in the book when I bought the storage facility from the lady who had gotten the property from a divorce. Let's talk about how the numbers work out when you use the master lease strategy. In the master lease scenario, you have no debt and you have no equity. Why? Because you don't own the property. So the entire capital stack is covered under your control of the lease. With that being said, the income, the expenses, and the NOI on the property are still the same. Let's say you negotiated with the property owner to make lease payments of $500 a month to them in exchange for control of the property. That'd be $6,000 a year in lease payments. Instead of having debt service that we have to pay to the bank, we have lease payments. This goes below the NOI. So what we did is replace the debt service with lease payments. After we pay our master lease fee to the property owner, we plan to have a cash flow of $4,800 a year off of this property. It's the same property we were talking about before with income of $18,000, operating expenses of $7,200, and NOI of $10,800. Now we have lease payments of $6,000, $10,800 minus $6,000 give us $4,800 a year of cash flow. That's a pretty great deal, as long as this is a win for the property owner and a win for you. Let me ask you a question. Would this be a win for you if the property owner wanted $12,000 a year in lease payments? No, it wouldn't. At that point, you would not be cash flow positive. This master lease would become a liability instead of an asset. The second part to add to this master lease equation is an option. What is an option? In finance, an option is the right, but not the obligation, to buy something at a predetermined price. I'll say that again. In finance, an option is the right, but not the obligation, to buy something at a predetermined price. Stock options are the most popular form of options. A quick example. Today's price of XYZ company is $10 a share. You pay $1 for an option contract that allows you to purchase shares of XYZ company for $12 a share 120 days in the future, 4 months from now. If the price of the shares are $15 in 120 days, you would have made money. The way you make money is by buying the shares at your option price of $12 and turning around and selling them for $15. You make $3 a share, but the option costed you $1. So really your profit is $2 per share. But you know me, I hate stocks. How can we bring options to real estate? Well, it's simple. We tell the owner that our master lease has an option with it. We want the option that allows us to buy the property for $100,000. This is simply called a lease option or a master lease with an option. We gain control of the property and start leasing to tenants in order to generate cash flow. Then when the property is worth more than the option price, we can buy the property or hold it. Or we can turn around and sell the property. Let's analyze this real quick as if we had a master lease in place for an option for $100,000. After 3 years, the property is now worth $120,000. So here we have an image of a capital stack. The property is worth $120,000 and you have a master lease that goes from $0 to $100,000. Between $100,000 and $120,000, that is your option value. So quick math tells me that over the course of 3 years, at $6,000 a year of lease payments and $4,800 a year of cash flow, you made a total of $14,400 of cash flow and $20,000 of option value. You made all of that with $0 in the deal. Here's another way to own property and profit from it with no money down. Like we did last time, let's go over to reality and talk for a second. Is every owner you talk with going to want to master lease the property to you? No. Why would an owner want to lease option to you? For the same reason they would owner finance to you. They like cash flow, but they're ready to retire. So what's the biggest difference between a lease option and owner finance? There's one big difference, and it's really important to know. We talked earlier in section 1.7 about the title to a property. When you are approaching anyone who owns a property, you're asking to purchase the property from them and for you to become the title holder. If you cut an agreement with the owner to sell you the property and owner finance the money, they're not only going to be the bank for you, but they're also going to give you ownership and title to the property. If you're a good person, which I trust you are, the owner has nothing to worry about. But there are a lot of people out there who make agreements and don't follow through on their agreements. If someone did not pay the money monthly like they're supposed to, in order to get their money back, the seller would have to foreclose on the property. Just like if you don't pay your home mortgage, the bank will foreclose on you. But the foreclosure process can be a long process. Sometimes it can take years, and as we've seen, sometimes the government will ban foreclosures. For that reason, it's better for an owner to lease option than it is to owner finance. If someone does not uphold their end of a lease option, the owner can terminate the lease and get control of the property instead of having to go through the foreclosure process. Sure, it's still a legal process and evicting someone is no fun, but it's much easier than foreclosure is. Other than that, lease options and owner finance work the same. As investors, we'd rather do an owner finance than a lease option because we get depreciation to help us on taxes, and our personal financial statement is stronger when we have actual ownership of a property rather than lease options. And so there you have it, Lease Options 101. Section 3.4, put your money to work. So we've talked a lot about the capital stack and moving pieces of the puzzle around to get a deal done. A lot of what I'm talking about here is how to get the benefits of owning property without having to put much money in. But let me tell you something that is critically important. As soon as you are able to put your own money into deals, do it. The purpose of having money is to be able to acquire assets that will pay for your lifestyle. Getting deals done with little or no money is 100% possible, but it requires more work. You can work on owner finance or lease option deals, or as we will talk about in the next section, you can raise money from investors. If you have no money, those are your options. But as soon as you do have money, put it to work. Real estate investing does not have to be about no and low money down deals for your entire career. Sure, they're great, but having your money work for you is great too. If we go back and look at the capital stack, anytime it says equity, that's where you would put your money in. Don't let all these lessons about how to buy property with no money think that you shouldn't be putting your own capital into deals. If you're a full-time real estate investor that's finding great deals, managing your assets, and using your own capital to purchase more properties, then that's amazing. That should be everybody's goal. But if you have a job that earns good income but limited time, then you should consider being an investor in other people's deals. Let them do the hard work and you put up the capital. The world of real estate investing is like a ladder. On the left side of the ladder, we have the position, and on the right side of the ladder, we have what's required. At the bottom of the ladder, we have an entry point into real estate. The first step for most people is either being an agent or getting into wholesaling property. This requires only time. Really, all that's required to be a wholesaler or an agent is time. In order to get good at being an agent or wholesaler, you're going to have to spend a lot of time in the beginning. As you grow in your career, you'll be able to build systems and spend less time, but your time will always be required. The next rung moving up the ladder is flipping. As a flipper, you move from investing just time to investing both time and money. Hopefully, as a flipper, you start making more money per hour than you did as a wholesaler or agent. You can also systemize the flipping business, but at some level, you'll always be trading time for money. As we move up one more rung on the ladder, we have residential investors who focus on housing 1 to 4 units. On this step, we officially reach investing. This is where we trade time up front for money forever. But don't get me wrong, finding and buying deals does in fact require time, and it does require money, although as we talked about in prior sections, it doesn't always have to be your money. But on this step, halfway up the ladder, we can officially call ourselves real estate investors because you are now going to start earning money in the form of monthly cash flow instead of fees, commissions, and flip profits. This is a big step, but it still requires energy. Next up, we move into commercial investing. As a commercial investor, we have to invest time and money just like a residential investor, except in this case, most checks have an extra zero or two on the end of it, meaning instead of giving $1,000 of cash flow a month, you get $10,000 a month. Or instead of $100,000 from selling a property, you get $1 million from selling a property. That means that for the work you're putting in, you'll be earning more money per hour. You'll also be getting larger and larger residual cash flow checks. There are a number of other benefits too, as mentioned in my prior book. The final rung on the ladder, at the very top, is being a passive investor. Passive investor sits at the top of the ladder for one reason: their time is not required. The energy a passive investor has to put in is very limited. All they have to do is review a deal that gets sent to them. If they like the deal and the person who sent them the deal, they call their banker up to wire the money. Then they log into their bank account and watch the cash flow come in as the months go by. They also get the tax benefits. That's the extent of the work that's required. And that's the ultimate dream for all of us, to have enough money that all we have to do is write checks. And sure, doing deals is fun, but if you don't have the time to actually get out and do deals, then you should participate in other people's real estate deals. Get your money working in real estate. That's the mission. If you want to learn more about investing with me, go to haydencrabtree.com/investor and we can talk more about how my deals work out and how you can get involved. The main takeaway from this chapter is simple. If you have enough money to invest in real estate, then do it. If you're a busy person, don't let the lack of time keep you from investing in real estate and getting the benefits. If you have money and time, start putting your own funds to work in deals. If you don't have any money, let's move on to the next section and talk about how we can create win-win situations from investors like the people I'm talking to in this section. Section 3.5, Raise Money from Investors. By now, I'm hopeful that your eyes have been opened to how many options you have in order to get a deal done between you and the property owner. In all of these structures, we're leveraging the equity that exists within the property and creating a deal between just you and the property owner. Those structures are great because it's just the two of you. But what do you do when the owner is not able to perform an owner finance or a lease option because those structures won't solve their problems? You find the money somewhere else. Luckily for you, money is everywhere. As I mentioned earlier, there's more money than ever before, and all of it is looking for a deal to invest in. In this section, we're going to talk about how to create win-win structures for yourself and others who want to be investors with you. By the end of this section, you'll have no excuses. Let's start with the same example we've been using this whole time, a purchase of a $100,000 rental house. Let's say you have the deal under contract and are figuring out your capital stack. The owner has already indicated to you that owner financing or lease optioning the property to you would not help them hit their goals. So instead, you need to get the money from somewhere else. Call the investors. As mentioned in the last section, there are so many people in the world who want to be real estate investors, have the money to do it, but lack the time. And that's where you come in. Bring deals to the table and have one or more investors put the cash required into the deal. Solve the three keys of the deal. First, you get the deal, manage the investment, and let somebody else provide the capital. Let's revisit the scenario. $100,000 purchase, $20,000 of repair, $5,000 of closing costs, a bank loan of $75,000, and that means you need $50,000 of equity to close this deal. Now let's remember, the NOI on this deal was $10,800. The debt service at the $75,000 loan is $4,830 a year, meaning the cash flow on this deal is $5,970 a year. Now, there are an infinite number of ways to split the money up that the deal produces. Let's go through one example. Here's what you could do. Tell the investors that you need $50,000 from them to close this deal. You'll give them an 8% preference, which is also called a pref, on the cash flow. This means that out of all the money that comes out of the deal, they will earn 8% on their investment before any money is split to you. And so 8% of $50,000 is $4,000 a year. Of the $5,970 of cash flow, the first $4,000 goes all to the investor. That leaves $1,970 of cash flow to be split over the pref. So let's say you did a 50-50 split over the pref. That would give you 50% of the $1,970, which is $985. In total, the investor would get the first $4,000 from their pref, plus they'd also get 50%, the $985. So their total cash flow would be $4,985 a year. But this is just one way to make money when raising capital. You should also negotiate an equity split with your investors. There are two forms of money that are produced by real estate. The first is cash flow, which we just covered. The next form is called a capital event. All that means is the money that comes out of the deal when you either sell it or refinance the property. So how would you split the capital event funds? One way to do this would be to have a 50-50 split on any capital event distributions over the return of capital. In simple terms, that means after the investor gets paid back their full $50,000, then all money would be split 50-50. If the house were to sell and the proceeds after all closing costs were paid were $200,000, here's how the money would flow. The bank would get paid off first. Let's say the loan is paid down from its original amount of $75,000 to $70,000 at that point. So $200,000 minus your bank payoff of $70,000 is $130,000 left over to be given back to you and your investor. The investor would get the first $50,000 as repayment of their investment. So after they get back their money, that would leave $80,000 to be split 50-50 between you and your investors. That's $40,000 to you, and that's an extra $40,000 to the investor. The investor walks away with a total of $90,000. We just went over another way you can buy property, generate cash flow and equity without having to put any money into the deal. Yes, the deal did require money, but it didn't have to be your money. The beautiful thing about all this is you can customize the agreement with the investor to whatever you want. It always makes sense to create win-win scenarios, though. In the situation above, you can tell the investor, say, hey, look, I don't get paid until I perform on this deal and you earn a profit. And that's 100% true. If the project produced less than 8% cash on cash, then you would earn no cash flow. If the deal did not sell at a price that resulted in more than the investment amount coming back, then you would not have earned any money. This really makes you put your money where your mouth is, and that's the way it should be. Your investor worked hard for their money, and you need to respect that. As we move through the capital piece of the three keys, we've talked about several strategies to get a deal done. Now that you understand the capital stack, you can mix and match different strategies and sources of capital. For example, in the lease option section, I told you to ignore the $25,000 needed for repairs and closing costs on top of the $100,000 purchase. Why did I do that? Because in that deal, you would need $25,000 of equity to get the deal done. So here's what you could do. Take the $100,000 master lease and then raise $25,000 from an investor. The P&L in that situation would look like this. We have an NOI of $10,800 a year. Our lease payments would be $6,000, and our cash flow would be $4,800 a year. On the same terms as earlier, the 8% pref to the investor would only be $2,000. That leaves $2,800 to be split 50-50, yielding you $1,400 a year of cash flow. If the deal were to sell and net $200,000, the first $100,000 would go to pay for the option price. That would leave $100,000 to be split between you and your investor. They need to get paid back their $25,000 investment first. That leaves $75,000 to be split 50-50, resulting in $37,500 to you. The options are endless. I could write an entire book on strategies and structures for raising capital, but what you've read here is a solid foundation of what you need to know to get started. Here are a few other options you should consider. A debt investment. Instead of being in an equity position, your investors would invest with you through a debt structure. You could create a loan at 8% interest. All you would have to do is pay your investor interest, and if you sell the property, you would give them their money back. In the lease option example we just talked about, where the investor invested $25,000, that means you would pay them 8% of $25,000 a year, which is $2,000 a year. Your cash flow would now go up to $2,800 a year, and when you sell the property, you would get the full $75,000 of money left over after paying the investment back. $75,000 is how much money you personally would make. This is more profitable for you, but in exchange, you're taking on more risk. If the deal isn't profitable, you have to find a way to pay the debt investor back. But that's why some investors are willing to accept lower returns. They get guaranteed payments. As we just saw in the above example, expensive debt is cheaper than equity when you have a great deal. The next option is a convertible loan. This is a hybrid between debt and equity. A convertible loan begins like any other loan. There's a loan amount and set payments. But at some point in the loan, it becomes equity. Here's an example of how this would work. You're doing a development project that requires $100,000 of equity. You have an investor who wants to invest $100,000 in the project, but they don't like that the project isn't going to produce cash flow for 2 years. So you create a convertible loan. The loan amount starts at $100,000 with an 8% interest rate. Once the project is completed and generates cash flow, the loan goes away and converts into equity. Now the investor does not have guaranteed debt payments. Instead, they earn a percentage of the cash flow in equity. Just like we talked about earlier, there are many ways to split this up. It could be an 8 pref and a 50-50 split of equity, or you could earn more than a 50-50 split because you reduce the investor's risk by structuring the investment as a loan during the riskiest time of the project. Another option is retirement accounts. As of writing this book, as of saying this right now, there are $35.4 trillion of financial assets held by American retirement accounts. And that's a lot of dough. The part that puzzles me is how almost none of these people who own that money or those assets know that they can use those funds to buy real estate. That's right, you can use funds in retirement accounts to buy and invest in real estate. More importantly for you to know, you can have investors use their retirement accounts to fund your deals. Because the money's in a retirement account, your investors cannot personally benefit from that investment until they reach retirement age. But that's normal for all retirement accounts, no matter what it's invested in. At least you can help your investors diversify their retirement accounts out of just stocks and bonds and get them into real estate too. So when someone tells you, I would love to invest in this deal, but I just don't have the cash, you can tell them they have the option of using their retirement money to invest. Because the suits on Wall Street earn money solely based on how much money they manage, they don't like for people to know about this. Because if your investor gives you money for real estate deals, they're taking money out of the pockets of Wall Street. Because of this, they made it a little tricky to use this money. Your investors can't use any retirement account to invest. They have to put their money into a special account type. The most popular kind of account that can invest in real estate is called a self-directed individual retirement account. Individual retirement account is an IRA, which you've probably heard of, but the self-directed part is what's new. In a self-directed IRA, investors can continue to invest in whatever, stocks, bonds, or mutual funds they're already invested in. But it opens the option to invest in real estate too. In addition to real estate, they can also invest in some cool other stuff like precious metals, tax liens, startup businesses, existing businesses. They can make loans, or they could even invest in racehorses as long as they don't use it for their own personal use. And that's pretty crazy, right? But before you go all in on the self-directed IRA, you need to know that it has a downside. It's called the Unrelated Business Income Tax, also called UBIT. The great thing about these retirement accounts is that they're tax-free, but the UBIT tax is a rule that says these retirement accounts can be taxed if they invest in real estate that has debt associated with it. So if your investor used the self-directed IRA to invest in a property with you and you have a 70% LTV loan on the purchase, your investor would have to pay their tax bill, but only at 70% of what it should be. There are some other lesser-known retirement accounts out there. I made a video on my favorite. Check it out at haydencrabtree.com/resources. It's my favorite because it has all the benefits of a self-directed IRA, but you don't have to pay UBIT tax just because you use this vehicle. Nothing else changes, just no taxes. The point of me saying all this is this. When you have a good deal, you can get the capital and complete the deal. Average deals are not going to allow you to raise capital. If a deal only returns 6 or 8%, then you're not going to be able to bring an investor in and split the cash flow and equity that a deal produces. You'll have to give all the money to the investor and you won't make anything. But remember when I said earlier that getting a real estate deal done is like completing a car ride? You need a reliable vehicle, a driver, and then the fuel. In a real estate deal, you need a good deal, which is the vehicle, an asset manager, which is the driver, and you need fuel, which is the capital. When you find off-market deals, underwrite them, and find out they have strong returns, you have 3 options. Option 1, try to work a no-money down deal with the owner. Option 2, use your own money to fill in the equity portion of the capital stack. Option number 3, use an investor's money to fill in the equity portion of the capital stack with a structure that makes sense. And don't overcomplicate this. To make it happen, you have to take action. No more, I've got no money excuses. It's time for you to do it. Section 3.6. You can do that? I'd be regretful if I finished this book without letting you know on 2 lesser-known ways to close deals and solve the pieces of the capital stack. Some people will tell you what we're about to go over is not possible or you can't do that. They're wrong. You can. The first thing to talk about is called loan assumption. This is also referred to as subject to, but we're going to abbreviate it as sub 2. So what exactly is sub 2? Essentially what happens here is that you're buying a property from a seller. Let's again say we're buying the property for $100,000. In this example, the owner has a mortgage on the property for $70,000 with First Community Bank. Normally, when an owner has debt, they would take the $100,000 that you give them for the property. The first $70,000 would go towards paying First Community Bank off and paying that loan down to zero. The other $30,000 would be for them to keep. In the example of a 70% LTV purchase, you would go to your bank, and let's call this Second Community Bank, get a loan for $70,000 and put $30,000 of equity in. But in a sub-2 deal, instead of going to Second Community Bank and getting your own loan, you keep the loan that's currently on the property with First Community Bank. Instead of getting a new loan, you just keep the one that's already in place. This can allow you to take advantage of the prior owner's debts that's already been paid down. Because this loan's been around for a while, it's more in the life cycle of paying off principal rather than a majority of your payments going towards interest. That means more of the payments you make are going to build equity for you rather than go into profits for the bank. Also, if you're not qualified to go get your own loan, this is a powerful way to break that cycle and build a cash flowing asset without getting a loan in your name. Now, some mortgages have a due on sale clause, meaning that if any portion of the ownership of that property is transferred to a new buyer, the entire loan can be called due. Practically what that means is that if you buy a property sub-2 and the lender finds out, they can tell you you have 30 days to pay the mortgage off. As long as the mortgage payments roll in on time, lenders will likely never notice that the ownership property has been transferred. It's generally good advice to check and see if the mortgage that you're looking to assume has a due on sale clause or not. If it does, know your risk. At any time, you may be forced to pay the loan off. Intentionally concealing the fact that you did purchase the property sub-2 can be a crime, so don't do that. But using sub-2 can be a creative way to create win-win deals. Just keep the risks in mind. All right, and for our last trick in the capital key, let's talk about an investor who always has your back. His name is Amex. That's right, get your wallet out because you can buy real estate on your credit card. But before I tell you how this works, let me warn you. I'm a fan of using affordable, long-term debt to buy cash-flowing assets. It's not wise to use credit cards for things you cannot afford. So don't take this section as permission from me to use your credit card to buy TVs and clothes that you can't afford. Don't do that. Now let's talk through this whole credit card concept. First, you need a credit card. In order to keep your personal credit score in check, it's better to open a business credit card with a company that does not report your business stats to your personal credit report. One that I know of is Amex. Next, you open a credit card and look for a promotion that's going on. A lot of times you can find promotions that do not charge interest for the first 12 or 18 months of opening your credit card. That's great because credit cards can charge a lot of interest, and that interest cost can kill a deal. If you go get a 0% interest credit card, use that money to finance the upgrade or repair costs that you may incur on that deal. You can also use that card to pay for your business expenses in the beginning, allowing your cash to build up in your account. There are some attorneys who will accept a credit card at the closing table to pay for a down payment, so you may also want to ask about that too. In addition, there are some companies out there that will allow you to pay for anything with your credit card. You tell them where to send the money and your credit card number. They'll charge your credit card for that amount plus a fee for their services and then send the money in a check wherever you tell them you want it to go. I would suggest you only use this strategy on value-add deals. Refer back to section 1.6. In an ideal world, you would use your credit card as a source of cash to fund and improve the deal. Then, before the 0% interest time period runs out, you go to a traditional bank and perform a refinance to get enough cash back to pay off the credit card. That way, you never have to pay the high interest rate fees that you're going to start getting charged for having the money on the card after the promotion period. Now, I know you're thinking that most credit card limits won't take you very far, but I know several real estate investors have gotten access to more than $100,000 of 0% interest. So that's another way to buy real estate with none of your own money. If it's a good enough deal to perform the credit card trick, it should also be a good enough deal to raise capital from an investor. So you can mix and match different sources here as you solve the pieces of the capital stack. Conclusion. Through these pages, we've gone over the framework that you can apply to truly make progress in building your real estate portfolio. Not only have you learned step-by-step processes, but more importantly, you've learned what the full picture is. Now that you know the 3 keys framework, you're in a powerful position to understand all the tasks you'll have to do yourself. Or you can now find partners that can fill the positions that you cannot. At this point, you really have 2 options. First, you can treat this like every other audiobook you've ever listened to. You can put it back in your audiobook bookshelf and be motivated for the next week. You can promise yourself that you're going to put these lessons into action and make some progress. But then life happens. You get sidetracked, and a month from now, you're looking for another book to read, hoping to catch that same feeling of motivation. Or you can go with option 2, where you decide to commit to making it happen. You can make the decision to take immediate action right now. If there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that decisiveness and speed of action are what separates the top 1% from the bottom 99%. The decisions you make compound. It's called the snowball effect. It's why the wealthy only get wealthier. It's why you and every other listener to this audiobook will answer this question the exact same. Don't you wish you started buying property 5 years ago? So if you finally want to start building your wealth in real estate, if you want to get started buying assets that will pay you each month, go up in value, and be here 100 years from today, if you forever want to lower your tax bill legally and ethically, then I want you to use this book as your opportunity to take action today and take the first steps towards growing your portfolio and building a life of financial freedom. After my first book, Skip the Flip, I received dozens of emails each week from investors, experienced and new, who had questions, comments, and were interested in joining me on deals. I tried to take these calls one-on-one for a while, but I simply ran out of time. So instead, what I created is a community and an online education platform called the Real Estate Cash Flow Accelerator. The Cash Flow Accelerator is like a virtual boot camp for real estate investors, and right now it's the only way to work directly with me on your real estate deals unless you're a direct investor in one of my portfolio properties. I don't know you, so I can't say for certain whether or not you'd be a good fit or what your goals are. What I do know is that every single week inside the Cash Flow Accelerator, we're celebrating wins from our members. Members who've just completed their first deal analysis, members who just closed on their first property, members who just exited a property, and members who have hit their number and reached financial freedom. If that sounds like an environment you'd like to be a part of, my team and I have set aside some time on our calendars to talk to people who are ready to get started and take action on their journey into real estate investing. Are you interested? Simply go to this link and apply for a call with one of my advisors and see if you might be a good fit. Go to haydencrabtree.com/schedule to schedule your call today. In the bottom of my heart, I know the American dream is alive and available for anyone who is willing to work hard in the real estate field. I've achieved the American dream, and you can too. You're in control of your future as long as you're willing to work for your goals. Go do it. I'm rooting for you. Hayden. The world needs your help. I sincerely hope you got a dump truck full of value out of listening to this audiobook. If that's the case, then I just have one small favor to ask you. It's not about helping me out, it's about helping some other stranger out. The main way this information gets in the world is through Amazon. It has computer algorithms that try and put the right products in front of the right people. And they know exactly who the people are who want to achieve financial freedom through real estate. It's kind of creepy, but they're really good at it. The number one way they decide to show you a product or not is if the product has great reviews. If the product has great reviews and they know you're interested in that kind of product, they'll suggest the product for you. And it works the same with books. With that said, if you got any value out of this book, please go leave a review on Amazon. Not for me, I already know all this stuff. Do it for the person who needs to learn this information to change their life. Someone out there is looking for this information. They want to quit their job. They want financial freedom. They want to spend more time with their family. They want to maximize their time on this earth. They want to achieve the American dream. Help them out. Leave a review of this book on Amazon. Karma will reward you.